Chapter 322. When Lin Fengting walked out of Huading International Airport, the rain over Huading had stopped, and the dark clouds were gone. The setting sun burned the last of its light, illuminating the horizon with a fiery red and gorgeous color. Lin Yuxian followed his father out of the airport in a hurry and said subconsciously, "Dad, would you like to eat something first?" "No need." Lin Fengting shook his head. Perhaps because he came to Huading, his heart relaxed a little, and a smile appeared on his face. "Let's go directly to Lin. At that time, ask your Grandpa Li to cook something delicious for you. His cooking skills are very good. When I was a child, my favorite food was the side dishes he made." "When I was a child," Lin Yuxian muttered to himself and repeated the sentence. Lin Fengting's expression was a little complicated, and he whispered, "When I was a child, the Wang family of Beihai, the Li family, and the Lin clan had a good relationship, and they had frequent contacts with each other. At that time, I was about 16 or 17 years old. I, Tianzong, and Kuangtu learned swordsmanship with Senior Li for 2 years. Earlier, it was Senior Wang of the Wang family of Beihai who laid the foundation for the 4 of us. Later, the 4 of us were in Switzerland and taught by your grandfather for a few years. The martial arts of the Wang family of Beihai and the Lin clan are different. Even the 24 moves of sword of the Li family are different from those of the Lin clan. At that time, in addition to strengthening the feelings of our younger generation, the 3 old people's approach was to cultivate the strongest martial arts masters." His eyes were a little wandering, and he seemed to think of something happy. He smiled and said, "Those years were the most relaxing days for me." "For people?" Lin Yuxian asked. He only heard his father mention 3 people. Lin Fengting's smile stiffened, and his face became a little ugly. But in the end, he said nothing and just said slowly, "Let's go to Linen." Huading was not far from Lin, and only 200 kilometers away. The father and son got in a taxi and told the driver the address. After the taxi got on the airport expressway, it went straight to Lin. Lin Fengting looked out of the window. The scenery outside the window went back quickly. The splendid sunset glow had already dimmed. The night spread and seemed to cover everything. The lights on the roadside were on. The light shone on the window, and Lin Fengting saw his face. It was a calm, almost indifferent face. Lin Fengting suddenly felt that this face was somewhat unfamiliar. He was surprised by his own calmness. He recalled the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai. He reminisced with a calmness that he had never experienced before. He recalled Wang Tianzong's involuntary actions, Wang Tianzong's clear conscience, the spectacular collapse of the Li family, and the silence and inaction of the Wang family of Beihai. Before, Lin Fengting had not understood why Wang Tianzong had abandoned the friendship between the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai so naturally, nor could he understand why the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family, who supported each other, had parted ways overnight. Therefore, for many years, he had a deep prejudice against Wang Tianzong's actions and was even a little vigilant. He abandoned his friendship with the Li family. Naturally, he could abandon his friendship with the Lin clan like a pair of worn-out shoes. The Lin clan was outside the world. Therefore, it was hard for Lin Fengting to imagine how indifferent and cruel Wang Tianzong was when he made that series of decisions. However, it was not until this moment, looking at the strange face printed on the window, that Lin Fengting really understood that Wang Tianzong's heart was not indifferent and cruel at that time. The setting sun had completely disappeared. The night shrouded the world. Lin Fengting looked at his face in the window. The face flickered in the receding scenery outside the window. It was a little gloomy and a little brilliant. Only calmness remained unchanged, as always. Lin Fengting felt that he saw Wang Tianzong. Many years ago, when he decided to stand by and do nothing about the Li family, his expression should be so calm. Only calmness. Those friendships still existed. Those times were still warm. The Li family did nothing wrong. Neither did the Wang family. The Lin clan had no reason to condemn anything. When the camaraderie that they had cultivated to protect their common interests was threatened by more important interests or even survival, betrayal, falling out, and standing idly by, everything seemed so natural and so calm. Lin Fengting's surname was Lin, Li Kuangtu's surname was Li, and Wang Tianzong's surname was Wang. Different surnames were the biggest mistake. Have I changed? He looked at his son sitting next to him and suddenly asked very seriously. Lin Yuxian froze for a moment and then smiled. Father hasn't changed. Lin Fengting nodded and said, I haven't changed. It turns out that I'm the same as them. He gradually lost his emotions, and his whole person completely calmed down. At this moment he completely understood Wang Tianzong. But it could not change his choice. Just because he was the patriarch of the Lin clan. Lin Yuxian's cell phone rang. It was a short message. He took out his cell phone and looked at it. His face changed slightly. He hesitated and said, Dad, there is just news from Switzerland. My uncle's legs are not working. I'm afraid he will have to rely on a wheelchair in the future. Lin Fengting gently clenched his fist and nodded imperceptibly. Lin Su was blind, and his hearing and language ability began to decline. Now, he lost his legs again under the backfire of the secret of heaven. Lin Su's surname was Lin. For the Lin clan he could have no regrets. It was just like Lin Fengting's own choice. He said the cause and effect. Next, it was up to Lin Fengting to carry it out. The cause and effect was round. But the cause and effect in Lin Su's mouth was straight. He said everything clearly and straightforwardly, without the slightest twists and turns. That was why the backfire of the secret of heaven was so fierce and even tragic. If the Lin clan wanted to continue to prosper, it needed to keep Qin Weibai alive. The cause and effect between the Lin clan and Qin Weibai still originated from the Li family, or rather, from Li Tianlan. This was the most straightforward cause and effect. And the twists and turns in the middle were the mysterious destiny of heaven. Lin Fengting had no choice. He came to Zhongzhou State, which proved that he had made up his mind. He could not give up the opportunity to let the Lin clan continue to prosper. So he wanted to keep Qin Weibai alive, and at the same time he wanted to keep the root of the cause and effect. That was Li Tianlan. To protect Li Tianlan, he had to protect Li Honghe. This was cause and effect. Lin Fengting knew what it meant. It meant that when protecting this cause and effect, no matter who he faced, even if he faced the Wang family of Beihai or Wang Tianzong, he had to take action. There was no righteousness. Just for the Lin clan. Just like Wang Tianzong let the Li family collapse for the Wang family. When it concerned himself and he had no choice, all the reluctance, unwillingness, and inability would disappear. Because he had no choice, he could only be calm. He had to do this. It didn't matter what others thought or understood, because he had no choice at all. So he had a clear conscience. Wang Tianzong was like this back then. So was Lin Fengting today. How could there be right or wrong? Lin Fengting suddenly patted the driver's seat in the front row. All the sadness, helplessness, and self-mockery disappeared completely when his smile gradually spread, turning into the most basic indifference. He took out a handful of banknotes and threw them to the driver, saying blandly, Sir, please drive faster. I'm in a hurry. It was cold in Kunlun. Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun were drinking. The wine was poured into a sparkling and translucent crystal cup, glowing with a light blue luster. Wang Tianzong picked up the glass in front of him and took a sip, whispering, It's too strong. It's just right to have a drink before killing. Gu Xingyun's smile was elegant and mellow. In Kunlun City, which was extremely cold because of the whistling wind and snow, the god of war of Zhongzhou State was dressed in a cyan gown, elegant and unrestrained like a scholar who didn't care about the world. That's right. Wang Tianzong nodded and drank up the wine in the glass. Has His Majesty decided? Gu Xingyun poured another glass of wine for Wang Tianzong and asked. He called His Majesty, and his tone was very natural. Not to mention the absolute strength symbolized by the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Tianzong alone was enough to win the respect of all Invincible Realm experts. There's nothing to decide. Wang Tianzong said blandly, This is something that must be done. He pointed to the TV on the wall beside him. Kunlun City was surrounded by wind and snow all year round, but the internal settings were extremely modern. Gu Xingyun's residence was extremely luxurious, and every detail was extremely meticulous. The huge TV, which occupied almost 1/3 of the wall, was playing a picture. On the picture were different states of Li Tianlan, moving or still, as if he was right in front of them. No one knew how long the picture had been playing. The two of them were no longer in the mood to watch it. He's a threat. Gu Xingyun glanced at the TV and said, I can't rest easy if he doesn't die. Then let him die. Wang Tianzong said blandly, when we go to Lin, and this time, I kill people and you restrain them. His tone was very calm, so calm that there was not the slightest ripple in it. Gu Xingyun paused. He looked up at Wang Tianzong's eyes and asked, do you want to kill him yourself? Wang Tianzong just drank the wine in silence. He made his attitude clear and didn't want to talk nonsense. The light blue wine was extremely strong. When he poured it into his stomach, he felt hot all over, and even his blood gradually boiled. There was a trace of killing intent in Wang Tianzong's eyes. It was very light, but it could obliterate everything. Gu Xingyun laughed and said, you kill Li Honghe, and I kill Li Tianlan. Wang Tianzong nodded indifferently. Gu Xingyun simply put the wine jar beside Wang Tianzong. He thought about it and asked, are the three of us enough? 3 people. Wang Tianzong, Gu Xingyun, Gu Qianchuan. The worst one was an ordinary invincible realm expert. This kind of power, considering only the strength of martial arts and nothing else, was enough to wipe out any force in Zhongzhou state, including the remaining Li family. Gu Xingyun was asking if the 3 of them were strong enough. What are you worried about? Wang Tianzong asked. Just in case. Gu Xingyun shook his head and said, I don't want any accidents. Wang Tianzong reached out and gently knocked on the famous sword of the Wang family of Beihai beside him. There will be no accidents. Under the Zhongzhou sword emperors listened to the sea, any accidents could be controlled. Gu Xingyun looked at the ancient sword under Wang Tianzong's hand. He was silent for a long time and suddenly said, there won't be a 4th person? Wang Tianzong's eyes suddenly flashed a trace of cold electricity. He looked at Gu Xingyun and said nothing. Is this why you hate Li Honghe? Gu Xingyun laughed. It was well known that the sword emperor of Zhongzhou state and the god of war of Zhongzhou state had little contact. After Kunlun city replaced the Li family, it basically had no contact with the Wang family of Beihai. Even if there were conflicts on weekdays, the two parties had never publicly expressed any attitude. In short, the two should not be familiar with each other. But obviously, the actual relationship between the two was not like that. Do you hate the Li family? Gu Xingyun said, I think it should be hatred. Otherwise, you probably won't choose to do it in person just because of Li Tianlan. So, in the battle that year, the injury of that person has not healed yet? This is the reason why you hate the Li family, so you want to kill Li Honghe in person? After the Li family's accident, an expert of the Jiang family who had just broken through the invincible realm entered Mount Dibbing at night. This matter has something to do with Kunlun city, right? If the word hate is used in everything, I also have a reason to hate Kunlun city. Wang Tianzong's tone was gloomy and cold. Gu Xingyun's expression did not change. He said with a smile, we are not friends, never. His words were simple. Kunlun city and the Wang family of Beihai were not friends. But at least in those days, the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family were friends. Wang Tianzong and Li Kuangtu were even friends. Don't talk nonsense. Wang Tianzong said blandly, Gu Qianchuan is too slow. We should set off. So, Gu Xingyun looked at his watch and suddenly said, what will you say after the Li family is completely destroyed? Destroy the Samsara Palace. Wang Tianzong said without hesitation. The Samsara Palace was now very close to the purgatory of Heaven Capital. To destroy the Samsara Palace, they also needed to cooperate. And on the point of destroying the Samsara Palace, their position was still the same. Gu Xingyun nodded and said again, what about Sai City? Wang Tianzong paused while drinking. He was silent for a while, then glanced at Gu Xingyun and said, let's wait and see. Gu Xingyun looked at Wang Tianzong. His eyes were a little cold. The atmosphere suddenly became a little quiet and depressed. The wine in the pot was poured into the cup and then into the stomach. The fragrance of the wine was overflowing. Did I do wrong back then? Wang Tianzong drank the wine and asked without warning. Back then, there were many years in his and Gu Xingyun's lives. But Gu Xingyun knew which one he was asking about. This question did not need to be answered. In other words, no matter who answered it, there would only be one answer. Gu Xingyun thought for a while and said with a smile, "Did you have a choice back then?" Wang Tianzong laughed at himself. Only when there was no choice would he cooperate with people who were not friends. For example, Gu Xingyun in front of him. When he made that decision, he was really calm, so calm that there was no room for regret. At this time of night, to Lin. This was the second cooperation between the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. Not long after the two sides cooperated for the first time. Then there was the collapse of the Li family and the treason case of Li Guangtu. Then there was the silence and inaction of the Wang family of Beihai, which made countless people in the Southeast group embarrassed and still could not be relieved. At that time, there was no Kunlun City in Zhongzhou State. But the first time Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun joined hands was also in the wind and snow. The wind and snow outside the window were whistling, as if through many years of quiet time, with a familiar chill. The beautifully decorated door was pushed open from the outside. Gu Qianxuan, the first elder of Kunlun City, appeared at the door. He looked at Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun and said gloomily, "The helicopter is ready. We can go to Lin at any time." Wang Tianzong said yes, picked up the wine glass, looked at the elegant and gentle Gu Xingyun in front of him, and said the same words as more than 20 years ago. Cheers. Chapter 323. In the evening, the wind blew by the West Lake. The breeze and the night spread at the same time. Under the gloomy sky, the wind wrinkled the surface of the lake. The reflection of the lonely mountain in the clear water spread with the ripples, looking more and more verdant. Lonely Mountain was no longer a tourist attraction of the West Lake. After Li Honghe set foot on Lonely Mountain with the remaining veterans of the Li family, the Lin, and officials soon announced that the interior of Lonely Mountain would be renovated. And then there was no then. The municipal government of Lin and reported the matter of Gushin to the provincial government of Jiangxia. The provincial government reported to the cabinet. The cabinet was silent. Therefore, the provincial government and the municipal government fell silent at the same time. The ticket office of Lonely Mountain was cancelled, and the surrounding areas were quietly moved out of the sightseeing scope of West Lake. The entire Li family began to take root in Lonely Mountain in the silence of the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State. The higher-ups were still silent. Everyone seemed to have forgotten the Li family and Lonely Mountain. So far, including Kunlun City, no one had expressed any opinion on Li Honghe's occupation of Lonely Mountain. Most of the time, silence was acquiescence. But most of the time, it could also be used as an excuse. However, it was obvious that as long as Li Honghe was still alive, the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State would not have any objection to the Li family's occupation of Lonely Mountain. There were no tourists on Lonely Mountain, and the people had been replaced by spiritual qi. When Li Tianlan came to the foot of Lonely Mountain, in the vast twilight, the verdant Lonely Mountain was located in the West Lake. It was hazy, and every grass and tree seemed to be indescribably beautiful. Flowers bloomed on Lonely Mountain. Li Tianlan got off the boat and walked straight along the quiet mountain road. Lonely Mountain was quiet. Li Tianlan's heart gradually became relaxed. He was relaxed, but also nervous. It had been 3 years since he first left the Li family's camp until today. But Li Tianlan still did not make any achievements. He entered the invincible realm in Heaven Capital and was ranked on the divine list today. He was known as the Heavenly Son of Zhongzhou State. That was at the cost of his martial arts foundation. He became the young governor of Sai City because of the friendship between the Li family and Sai City. East Emperor Palace was established. But today, the East Emperor Palace was still pitifully weak. Li Tianlan suddenly felt a little timid. In these 3 years, he seemed to have done a lot, but at the same time, he seemed to have done nothing. He was still in a state where he had just started. His martial Dao and sword intent had already reached a certain level. But the glory of the Li family was still bleak. Li Tianlan really wanted to tell those uncles and aunts on the mountain who had always been with the Li family, pinned all their hopes on him, and still persisted. He wanted to tell them that he had done a good job outside. But was it really not bad? 3 years, everything that had happened today, it was too slow. In the end, it was still too slow. He didn't think he had done a good job. If he didn't do it well, he wouldn't dare to go up the mountain. In the twilight, his footsteps gradually slowed down, even becoming somewhat heavy. There was only the sound of the night wind blowing the treetops on Lonely Mountain. There were no guards on Lonely Mountain, and there was no need for guards. Those who were hostile to the Li family would basically not go up the mountain. For those who insisted on going up the mountain, it would be useless to put guards in the mountain. Therefore, on the isolated Lonely Mountain, there was only a cold and somewhat lonely path most of the time. A woman wearing rough clothes appeared at the end of the path. The woman's face was very beautiful. Although there were some wrinkles at the corners of her eyes, the stubbornness and persistence between her eyebrows gave her an indescribable feeling. The two ends of the road, one above and one below. The woman saw Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan also saw her. The two of them froze at the same time. There was a touch of surprise in the eyes of the woman who was no longer young. Her delicate eyebrows raised subconsciously, and suddenly there was a trace of indescribable heroism in her body. Li Tianlan slightly quickened his pace and came to the woman. Before he spoke, the woman had already taken the initiative to speak and said with a smile, "Young master, you're back." Li Tianlan nodded and called her Aunt Xianxia. There were not many women who left Yuzhou with Li Honghe, and there were even fewer women. Xianxia was not only a woman, but also a capable general of the Li family. Moreover, she was a relatively young one. She was Li Wangsheng's mother and had the experience of taking care of children. Therefore, it was Xianxia who took care of Li Tianlan when he was a baby. Although Li Tianlan called her aunt, it was not an exaggeration to say that Xianxia was his adoptive mother. Xianxia reached out her hand and subconsciously wanted to touch Li Tianlan's head. But she withdrew her hand halfway. Her smile seemed to be more beautiful than before. Wangsheng just came back once last week. It would have been better if you had come a few days earlier. I can meet Wangsheng soon, Li Tianlan said with a smile. He hadn't seen Li Wangsheng since he came back. But the final maneuver of the two academies was about to begin. Li Wangsheng, as one of the 4 spirits of Zhongzhou State, was likely to be there in person. Where are you going? Li Tianlan asked. I'm going down to get something. Xianxia smiled and said, a few years ago, not long after we came here, Yu Donglai, Senior Yu, came here once. He arranged some local people to send some fruits, vegetables, and meat every day. Young master, our life is much better than before. Not good enough, Li Tianlan said in a deep voice. He looked up at the seemingly endless mountain road and said softly, these years, how is everyone? Very good. Xianxia was silent for a while and then said. She was still smiling, but her smile was extremely complicated. It was a kind of emotion that seemed to be happy and worried. This kind of emotion was so intense that Li Tianlan couldn't tell whether she was sad or happy for a while. It's just that His Highness is in poor health this year. Li Tianlan was shocked. It was an unchangeable fact that Li Honghe's body would get worse and worse as he lost control of his power. But he didn't expect it to happen so fast. Now it was only the 3rd year. He took a deep breath and said, I'll go up first, Auntie. I'll chat with you later. Xianxia nodded with a smile and passed by Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan took a deep look at her back. Compared with the beautiful but numb and desperate face in his memory, Xianxia smiled more now. She would also be sad and anxious when she mentioned her grandfather's body. But now looking at her back, Li Tianlan only felt that she was heroic. The Li family had emotions again. When all these emotions came together, it was hope. This was the current situation of the Li family. The best situation. But the best had nothing to do with him. Li Honghe changed. So the Li family also changed. Li Honghe's health was getting worse and worse. Everyone in the Li family was worried, but this hope never disappeared. Even if Li Honghe died tonight, the hope of the Li family would naturally fall on Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan turned around again and walked up the mountain quickly. His footsteps were still heavy, but they were full of firmness. There were some small wooden houses built on the top of Lonely Mountain. There were about 20 or 30 of them. The road on the mountain had been repaired, but the road condition was not good. It could only be said to be flat at best. The 20 or 30 small wooden houses were located in the green flowers and trees, like a small village built on the top of the mountain. The former Li family's camp had become today's Li village. The only thing that didn't change was the vast graveyard that made people tremble with fear. The cemetery was built on the ruins of Qingyun Temple. Mount Qingyun and Lonely Mountain were originally one. After Qingyun Temple disappeared, Mount Qingyun became Lonely Mountain. The highest peak of this lonely mountain had now become the cemetery of the Li family. Nearly 1,000 tombstones were neatly arranged layer by layer. The cemetery did not look gloomy in the night, but a little tragic and a little down. There was no one on the top of the mountain. Only a few lights were lit up in the small houses. Standing on the top of the mountain, Li Tianlan could clearly hear everyone's breathing. It was long, smooth, and rhythmic. This was the breathing rhythm that would only appear after falling into a deep and obvious state. The whole Li family was obvious. Everyone seemed to want to restore their peak state after many years of silence, or even surpass the peak state. Li Tianlan's heart kept sinking. Finally, it sank to the bottom of the valley. Just because everyone was meditating. But there were too few of them. Li Tianlan's face was pale. 16 people. Including Xianxia, there were only 17 people. This was the Li family today. Li Tianlan's body shook, and an indescribable anger instantly occupied all his consciousness. His eyes were scarlet. When he left the border 3 years ago, there were still more than 100 people in the Li family. After the border battle, including the wounded, there were more than 60 people in the Li family who survived. Now 3 years later, there were less than 20 people left in the Li family. Where did they go? Li Tianlan looked at the large cemetery in front of him, hesitated for a moment, and walked over with difficulty. A stooped old man came out of the cemetery. The old man was thin, and his hair was already gray. Because of his hunchback, his figure looked a little thin. He was carrying a broom in his hand, and it seemed that he had just come back from sweeping the grave. Li Tianlan's footsteps paused. The moment he saw the old man, his mood seemed to suddenly become extremely calm. The old man also saw Li Tianlan. His seemingly turbid eyes lit up quietly, and he said indifferently, "You're back." Li Tianlan said yes. This was the reunion of grandfather and grandson after 3 years. No surprise, no accident. Calm as water, indifferent as night. Li Honghe put the broom aside, waved his hand, and said, "Come in with me." Li Tianlan walked to Li Honghe. He had too much to say, but he didn't know what to say for a while. Grandpa had lost a lot of weight, and his spine, which had been straight all his life, had become crooked. The once high-spirited god of war of Zhongzhou state had gone away. The old man, who had guarded the border with the Li family for 20 years and had endured and been silent, had also gone away. Now he was only in his twilight years. That was the weakness of the rest of his life, with a kind of strength that had almost been completely out of control. At this moment, Li Honghe was so powerful that he seemed to be able to tear the world apart, but it seemed that he might fall down completely in the next second. "Your body," Li Tianlan hesitated and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. "Don't worry." Li Honghe's expression was open-minded and peaceful. "It's not the time yet. As long as I want to hold on, I can at least hold on for another 2 or 3 years. What about you?" Li Honghe glanced at Li Tianlan. "What have you learned in the past 3 years?" My body has changed." Li Tianlan said slowly, "And, Grandpa, I've given up the 24 moves of sword now." In Heaven Capital, he had seen and used the world-shaking unique skill of the Li family from the perspective of the invincible realm. In 3 years, his sword had vaguely jumped out of the scope of the 24 moves of sword and gradually became his own kendo. He had completely understood the 24 moves of sword, and it was time to give up. Li Honghe nodded casually and said, "It's your own way. You decide it yourself." There was no light in the cemetery. The higher they went, the darker it was, so the lights from the small wooden houses under the cemetery became more and more dazzling. "Where are our people?" Li Tianlan was silent for a while and finally couldn't help asking. "Them," Li Honghe smiled, but his smile was very complicated. "They have gone to the place where they should go." Those who stay now are unwilling to go. When I die, these people will follow you. Where did they go? Li Tianlan did not relax and continued to ask. The place where they should go. Li Honghe's tone was faint and without any emotion. Li Tianlan was about to continue asking, but Li Honghe had already changed the topic. Tell me about your experience in the past 3 years. Where have you been and what have you learned? Li Tianlan's 3 years were very simple. But it was very complicated. It seemed that there was nothing to say, but there was too much to say. Li Tianlan sorted out his thoughts and said slowly. From leaving the Sky Academy to Sai City, to seeing Situ Canghue's useless heaven and earth, to the primeval forest of Snow Country and the Volga River, to thousands of miles of frozen polar regions, to the mirage in the Pacific Ocean and the falling stars outside Hanggu Pass. He talked about the transformation of his willpower, the hidden sword intent after recovery, the golden retriever that followed him, and the famous sword divine punishment that Lin Fengting gave him but was completely broken in his hands. In his story, there appeared the Dongqing clan by Qingqian, Dongqing Rushi, Wang Yuetong, Qin Weibai, Samsara Palace, and even the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and the Wang family of Beihai. He said a lot. Li Honghe just listened in silence, without any expression or any opinion. The Li family's cemetery was very big. The grandfather and grandson walked up and down, walking very slowly. The whole Li family was still meditating. Li Honghe took Li Tianlan back to his very small wooden house. There was almost no decoration in the wooden house. A hard bed, a wooden table, and a few stools were all the furniture. However, they could take root in such a place where they could feel the climate change, with sunshine, rain, and snow. Compared with the Li family's past, this place was like a paradise. Li Honghe turned on the light, sat down on the stool beside the wooden table and said, "So, you are now the young governor of Sai City, and the East Emperor Palace you established has received the first investment, and you have established a cooperative relationship with Jiang Shangyu. Everything can start after the final maneuver is over?" Li Tianlan thought for a moment and nodded. "So, are you sure about the final maneuver of the 2 academies?" Li Honghe looked at his grandson who had been away for 3 years and asked with a smile. "It's not a matter of whether I'm sure or not, but a matter of having to win. I will win." Li Tianlan's tone was flat. "If only it were so simple." Li Honghe said softly, "Tianlan, I can't be sure about your current martial arts progress, but I think before entering the invincible realm, you'd better hide your strength as much as possible. It seems that you can win a starting point for yourself if you win the final maneuver, but your opponents are the entire Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City. Your future is still very difficult." Li Tianlan was stunned. He couldn't figure out what Li Honghe meant for a moment. "Grandpa, do you mean that I should give up the final maneuver?" Li Honghe was silent. From his twinkling eyes, Li Tianlan saw hesitation and hesitation. The final maneuver had become the most critical step since Li Tianlan entered the secular world. Between advance and retreat, it was very likely to be 2 completely different fates. Li Honghe asked him to hide his strength, which was more conservative. Li Tianlan had no intention of evaluating this conservatism. For him, he had no way out. "I won't give up," Li Tianlan said lightly. "Tell me your reason." Li Honghe's tone was calm. The Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City have been enemies for a long time. In any case, my existence is a threat to them. Whether I win or lose the final maneuver, it won't change their attitude toward me. In this case, I'd better win the maneuver and let those who support me and intend to support me have more confidence. Li Tianlan said softly, "Grandpa, you won't understand. If I lose to Wang Shengxiao in the maneuver, everything I've done before will be a joke. The Li family will also become a joke. I have no way out." "Have you ever thought about the attitude of the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City?" Li Honghe asked. "They have shown an obvious attitude." Li Tianlan said, "The reason why I can still live is that you are still alive, Grandpa. If they want to hurt me, they must get rid of you first. I have received the news that Wang Tianzong should be in Kunlun City now." Li Honghe suddenly raised his eyebrows. He looked at Li Tianlan and said in a low voice, "In this case, you shouldn't have come back." Li Tianlan was silent. There were many things in the world that didn't matter whether they should or not, but whether they should do it or not. I have to come back. He enunciated each and every word clearly. Li Honghe was here. The people of the Li family were also here. If the Li family was destroyed under the joint efforts of Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun, then what was the Li family he guarded? What was the point? Maybe. Li Honghe looked at Li Tianlan with complicated eyes and suddenly said, if it were him, he wouldn't have come back. Who is he? Li Tianlan asked seriously. He carefully watched Li Honghe's expression and didn't want to miss any detail. Li Honghe kept his mouth shut and just looked at Li Tianlan quietly. I have a few questions. Li Tianlan said, I should have asked them 3 years ago. I hope you can answer my doubts, Grandpa. Say it. Li Honghe was expressionless. Does the master of Samsara Palace and Weibai have anything to do with you? Who is the master of Samsara Palace? Li Tianlan asked. There could be no love for no reason in this world. Samsara Palace's protection of him. Qin Weibai's deep love for him. Li Tianlan believed that there would be an explanation for all this. At present, this explanation could only be obtained from Li Honghe. Li Honghe looked at Li Tianlan silently. His eyes were a little strange and complicated. He looked at Li Tianlan for a long time, then shook his head and said, I don't know. You don't know? Li Tianlan asked in reply. I really don't know. Li Honghe said with a wry smile, it was the master of Samsara Palace who found me. At that time, you were still in the desert prison, and my state was very bad. At that time, unless I fought desperately, I was no match for the master of Samsara Palace. When she came to me, she was not interested in the Li family at all. She was only interested in you. I could see that she would not harm you, so when you left the border, I gave you the contact information she had left. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and continued, what about the Dongqing clan? The Li family owes the Dongqing clan. Li Honghe said blandly, it has to continue to owe them. Li Tianlan frowned again. The identity of the master of Samsara Palace was not revealed. The matter of the Dongqing clan was another answer in Li Honghe's mouth. The answer he got from the Dongqing clan was that the Dongqing clan owed the Li family, not the Li family owed the Dongqing clan. What else do you want to ask? Li Honghe glanced at Li Tianlan and said, the muscles at the corners of Li Tianlan's mouth trembled. He suddenly smiled and said, does Grandpa know the purgatory of heaven capital? Li Honghe narrowed his eyes. Who is the deity of the purgatory of heaven capital? Li Tianlan looked at Li Honghe and asked. Li Honghe looked at Li Tianlan quietly, with a calm face. Is deity my father? Li Tianlan's voice trembled a little. It shouldn't be, right? He didn't know who deity was. But when he thought of what his grandfather had said to him a long time ago, he thought of deity's unique skill formed by countless changes of the 24 moves of sword, combined with his age and the conversation he had with Wang Tianzong in heaven capital. Li Tianlan didn't want to admit it. But countless speculations in his mind told him that the deity of the purgatory of heaven capital was his father, Li Kuangtu. Li Tianlan really didn't want to admit it, because when he broke through to the invincible realm in heaven capital, he could clearly feel that whether it was Wang Tianzong or deity, there was always a wisp of killing intent condensed on him. If deity was really his father, why did he want to kill him in heaven capital back then? He's not. Li Honghe finally spoke. He sighed softly and said, he's really not. Li Tianlan breathed a sigh of relief and looked at Li Honghe quietly. So, the future of the Li family still depends on you. Li Honghe said softly. Li Tianlan nodded. Grandpa, don't worry. His tone was calm and confident. The Li family will regain its glory in my hands. Whether it's the Wang family of Beihai or Kunlun City, I will make them pay back little by little. Oh, the Li family. Li Honghe's eyes were in a trance. The Wang family of Beihai? For the first time, there was a trace of undisguised pain in his eyes. That pain was so clear and deep in his old eyes, it was like a scar was carved into his eyes. He smiled and laughed at himself. What if the Wang family of Beihai didn't owe the Li family? Li Tianlan was stunned. I mean, if it was the Li family that owed the Wang family of Beihai, what would you do? Li Honghe asked. Li Tianlan had never thought about this question. For a moment he didn't know what to say. He remembered what his grandfather had said to him in Lonely Mountain 3 years ago. In my life, I haven't done many right things, but I've done many wrong things. But many mistakes can be made up for in the end. But some mistakes can't be made up for today. I can only make the best of them. Make the best of them? What did the Li family really do wrong back then? Li Tianlan's brain was a little confused for a moment. What did we do wrong back then? You're right. Li Honghe smiled helplessly and sadly. It's my fault. I'm too cowardly. It's all my fault. A voice suddenly sounded, drifting, as if it were falling from the 9th heaven, covering the entire Lonely Mountain in an instant. You're right. For many things, there is no right or wrong. Only success or failure can determine the result. Why do you blame yourself, seniorly? Li Tianlan stood up abruptly. It was Wang Tianzong's voice. He took a step subconsciously and was about to go out. Don't move! Li Honghe suddenly roared in a low voice. Li Tianlan froze and stood where he was subconsciously. He still came. Li Honghe whispered. He finally came. He slowly raised his palm. Li Tianlan's pupils suddenly contracted. In his sight, Li Honghe just raised his palm gently and crossed the air. But his whole arm seemed to be cut by a sword in the process of raising it. It was just a simple movement, but it spilled blood. The blood gushed out of Li Honghe's palm, but it didn't drip down. Instead, it floated in the air. It dyed the air red. The air seemed to have completely solidified. Li Honghe gently shook his hand. Countless beads of blood suddenly floated in the air, dyeing a large area of space red. Li Tianlan's pupils instantly contracted to the extreme. There was no air around him. Every corner of the small house was filled with sword energy unconsciously. The sword energy filled every inch of space and had turned into exquisite and sharp gaseous sword shadows one after another. Follow me, Li Honghe said and suddenly clenched his fist. The powerful sword intent instantly spread around Li Honghe, and the sword energy quietly emerging in the whole house was directly swept away. Li Tianlan followed his grandfather out of the door. He saw everything outside. In an instant, even with his willpower, he couldn't help but feel a little suffocated for a while. There was absolute darkness everywhere outside the room. The bright moon over Lin and had completely disappeared. A vortex with a diameter of thousands of meters appeared at the highest point of the sky. The vortex flowed slowly and completely covered the whole mountain. The sword intent all over the sky roared and took shape in the flow of the vortex. In front of Li Tianlan, there were all swords. The air was completely torn apart and condensed into exquisite and sharp sword shadows one after another. The sword shadows covered the sky, the earth, and Lonely Mountain. Countless sword shadows were thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions. Lonely Mountain was disappearing. Heaven and earth were disappearing. The majestic and dense sword shadows appeared in every corner of the whole Lonely Mountain, densely packed. Li Tianlan couldn't see Wang Tianzong. Only his voice rang out in the night sky. Seniorly, as long as you can walk out of this sword curtain tonight, all the grievances between the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family in the past can be written off. Li Tianlan breathed quickly. His breath was even filled with sword intent, which stabbed his internal organs and made him feel a sharp pain. This was the first time that Li Tianlan had seen Wang Tianzong's sword intent. It was the peak of sword intent. Every grass, every tree, every mountain, every water, the whole world, as long as he needed, everything was the sword in his hand. It was invincible and invincible. The sword shadows that occupied the whole world hung in the air. But the entire Li family seemed to have no foothold under this sword curtain. The sword shadows were like a raging tide, covering the world, roaring and surging. This was the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. What covered Lonely Mountain was the peak of sword intent in the entire dark world for decades. Chapter 324. The night turned into the deepest black, obscuring the moonlight and covering all the light. Everything on Lonely Mountain seemed to disappear completely. In all directions on the ground, in the sky and on the ground, as far as the eye could see, there were swords. The swords were densely packed together. The sword shadows were short and delicate, but they were indescribably sharp. Countless sword shadows hovered over the entire Lonely Mountain, row after row, piece after piece, up and down, everywhere, as far as the eye could see. Li Tianlan felt as if he had seen a sea. The ubiquitous sword intent around him was like the sea breeze on the sea. The sound of the wind was sharp but seemingly soft. It was a little cold and gloomy. Li Tianlan's breath was full of sword intent. The sword intent rushed into his internal organs through his breath and pierced his blood vessels. In an instant, Li Tianlan's body was already injured internally and externally. But the sword sea in front of him still hovered motionlessly in every corner of reality. It was like a calm sea. But no matter how calm it was still a sea, and it had the power to set off a raging tide and subvert everything at any time. Li Tianlan stared at the endless sword sea in front of him. He could feel that it was a sword strike. But this sword strike was completely beyond his understanding. He used to stand at the peak of martial arts. Even if his strength was gone now, his vision had never regressed. He could see that the world was quiet. He could see that the world was a void. He could see some of the trajectory of this sword strike. But he couldn't understand how powerful it was to have such an abundant and majestic sword intent. In the face of this sword strike, not to mention now, even if he entered the invincible realm in Heaven Capital, he might not have the slightest strength to resist. At this moment, Li Tianlan felt like an ant under the Sword Emperor's sword. The other members of the Li family on the top of the mountain were still motionless and seemed to be meditating. However, amidst the silence, some pained and hurried breathing sounds became extremely clear. The meditation had ended at the moment when the sword intent appeared. However, all the members of the Li family were completely blocked by this sword strike. The sword shadow and the sword energy coexisted, as if they were all over the world. Everyone was suppressed in place and could not move. Only Li Honghe remained calm. Wisps of sword intent spread around him, firmly protecting the space of about 10 meters around him. Wherever the sword intent passed, the sword shadows floating in front of him shattered. The sword shadow shattered into sword chi. The sword chi circled around Lonely Mountain and formed a new sword shadow. The cycle continued without end, and it seemed like the cycle of reincarnation. Li Honghe was motionless, letting the sword shadows in front of him break and reassemble. He kept releasing his sword intent, breaking the sword shadows within 10 meters around him. At this moment, the place where Li Honghe landed was the only pure land in Lonely Mountain. The pure land was only 10 meters wide. But the entire Lonely Mountain was more than 1,000 feet long. Li Honghe silently looked at the sea of swords in front of him that covered his whole vision and even occupied his whole consciousness. He saw a large number of sword shadows shattering, and then saw a large number of sword shadows reforming. What an impressive move, shatter reincarnation. Li Honghe sighed softly. Did you derive this sword move by yourself? Wang Tianzong was silent. There was only a sea of swords on Lonely Mountain, but no sword emperor. Li Tianlan's heart suddenly shook. Broken reincarnation. It was the last move of the 24 moves of sword, the absolute sword. Or rather, it was the last half of the style. 3 years ago, Li Tianlan once got the half-style sword manual from Lin Fengting. But before that, even in the 24 moves of sword of the Li family, there was no such half-style. But recently, Wang Tianzong used a complete move, broken reincarnation. If this sword move was derived by himself, how familiar would he be with the first 23 moves of the 24 moves of sword? Tianzong, don't you come out and talk with me? Li Honghe laughed. Anyway, I'm very happy that you can come to Lonely Mountain today. The sea of swords seemed to fluctuate with Wang Tianzong's emotions. So the whole world was shaking in front of Li Tianlan's eyes. The huge vortex spinning endless sword intent in the sky paused for a moment. Silently, Wang Tianzong's figure appeared in front of Li Honghe and Li Tianlan. The three of them were less than 10 meters apart. Wang Tianzong looked at Li Honghe calmly. Li Honghe was also looking at Wang Tianzong. His eyes were complicated, self-deprecating, and a little guilty. Li Tianlan looked at this scene and felt like he was witnessing history. The grievances that had existed for many years clearly appeared in front of him. In the sea of swords in front of him. Wang Tianzong hesitated, but still bowed deeply to Li Honghe and whispered, "Uncle Li." Li Honghe laughed. The past grudges and grievances seemed to become clear with the words Uncle Li. "You hate me?" Li Honghe said. "Hate doesn't make sense." Wang Tianzong shook his head. He looked at Li Honghe's increasingly old face, and his eyes were no longer calm. In a sense, in the past many years, Li Honghe was one of his closest elders. Even now, Wang Tianzong still clearly remembered the days when he learned swordsmanship with Li Honghe. The four of them learned the 24 moves of Sword of the Li family, the 24 moves of Sword of the Lin clan, and the 6 paths of reincarnation of the Wang family of Beihai. It was an unguarded time. The children studied hard, and the elders spared no effort in teaching. Wang Tianzong's emotions were chaotic and absent-minded. In the face of Li Tianlan, he could be calm because he was the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai and the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. But in the face of Li Honghe, he thought he could be calm and indifferent as well. But until he stood in front of him, Wang Tianzong knew that he was still the child of that year. At this moment, he was neither the Sword Emperor nor the patriarch. He was just Wang Tianzong. "You deserve to hate me," Li Honghe whispered. "I owe the Wang family of Beihai too much. You deserve to kill me today." "I don't hate you." Wang Tianzong looked into Li Honghe's eyes. "I know very well that when the Heroes Club, Fantasy World, and the Polar Ground Alliance joined forces to invade Zhongzhou State, my father's serious injury and death a few years later had nothing to do with you." Li Honghe was silent. He had a clear conscience in that battle. The old patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai was seriously injured. He was also seriously injured. Wang Tianzong would not hate him because of this. Most of the grievances between the Li family and the Wang family came from that battle. "It's my fault. Everything happened because of me. I thought you would come looking for me a few years ago." Li Honghe laughed at himself. The Li family and the Wang family have walked side by side for hundreds of years. That's not fake. Wang Tianzong's voice was very soft and his emotions were very sincere. "If the Li family doesn't enter the secular world from now on, I don't want to care about what happened that year. But now it's different." Li Honghe nodded and asked straightforwardly, "Will I die today?" Wang Tianzong's tone was very respectful and firm. "How about Tianlan and the Li family?" Li Honghe asked again. "I'll only kill you today." Wang Tianzong's tone was indifferent. That was very clear. He only killed Li Honghe. As for whether others would kill Li Tianlan or not, he would not care. Li Honghe did not speak, just looked at Wang Tianzong quietly. Wang Tianzong's tone was calm and soft. "You can't go back if you're wrong. Senior Li, the biggest mistake in your life is that you educated a good grandson, but you didn't educate your son well. If you were the fanatic of that year, what would you do?" Li Honghe suddenly asked. "I don't know." Wang Tianzong's mood did not fluctuate at all. "I didn't think about it either." Li Honghe chuckled. "Ambition? Sure enough, it can achieve everything and destroy everything." Wang Tianzong was silent. But the sea of swords in heaven and earth began to shake gently. The sword energy raged and swept across the sky. "Whether you believe it or not, I want to say that I didn't know at the beginning." Li Honghe whispered, "Fanatic has been ambitious since he was a child, and he inherited the stubbornness of the Li family. You entered the invincible realm a few years later than him, and at that time, your father's health was extremely poor, so he thought he saw an opportunity. He wanted to change and wanted to have a say in Zhongzhou State. He thought that the strength of the Li family was irresistible, and the Li family did not need any allies to advance and retreat together. So, Wang Tianzong suddenly interrupted Li Honghe's words. So he wanted to annex the Wang family of Beihai, even destroy the whole Wang family of Beihai, replace the Wang family of Beihai, monopolize the whole southeast group, and then conquer the whole Zhongzhou State? Li Honghe's body stiffened. Li Tianlan, who had been watching silently, also trembled and looked at Li Honghe and Wang Tianzong in disbelief. He did do a lot of things in those days. Within the Southeast group, the power contrast between the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai began to tilt. The power of the Li family even vaguely suppressed that of the Wang family of Beihai. During that time, you were all concerned about your father's health and neglected the control of the outside world. I was in charge of the Southeast group, but most of the time I was staring at the Prince group. By the time I realized what Fanatic had done, it was too late. He had completed his own layout and was only waiting for your father's death. Then he could control everything. Wang Tianzong listened quietly. He nodded and said, "So you made the best of the mistake." "Yes, how could the friendship with the Wang family of Beihai be more important than your son and the Li family?" "I wanted to stop it." Li Honghe smiled a little miserably. "But you should know Fanatic's character. He was ambitious, resourceful, and his character was extreme. By the time he thought he could let me know, the general trend had basically been formed. It was not easy for me to stop it. I had been mediocre all my life and was not strong enough. At that time, your father was in danger, and Fanatic entered the invincible realm earlier than you. Countless people in the Southeast group put their hopes on him. During that time, his voice in the Southeast group was enough to go against my will. I didn't want to break with the Wang family of Beihai, but the situation had reached that point. It seemed that everyone was forcing me to break with the Wang family of Beihai and completely annex you. The yellow robe. Wang Tianzong's tone was full of sarcasm. It hasn't come to that point yet. Li Honghe shook his head. At least in my opinion, there was still a chance to calm the situation back then. I talked with Fanatic several times and did something secretly. He was my son, and I knew his character very well. According to his character, if he succeeded in annexing the Wang family of Beihai, the future of the Li family would either be extremely brilliant or be doomed eternally. His path was too extreme, but I didn't want that kind of risky future. I wanted to try my best to reverse all this. I even wanted to go to Mount Dibbing to communicate with your father. Li Honghe smiled bitterly. But you moved too fast. Before I was ready, you had already united with Gu Xingyun and created the treason case on the border of Annan State. When I got the news, it was too late. Did I do something wrong? Wang Tianzong asked. He had asked this question to many people. Just a few hours ago, he had asked Gu Xingyun. Gu Xingyun said that he had no choice. But Li Honghe only kept silent. The treason case directly subverted the Li family. As the patriarch of the Li family, Li Honghe could not say that Wang Tianzong did the right thing. He could only choose to be silent. I don't know if I can believe you. But even if I can, Uncle Li, tell me, do I dare to believe it? The inheritance of the Wang family of Beihai for hundreds of years, the assets of trillions or even more, the stability of tens of millions of people, the future of hundreds of thousands of troops, and even the peace and stability of the entire Zhongzhou state. Wang Tianzong patted his chest. My father was in danger at that time, and all this was on me. If you were me, would you dare to bet on my trust in you with these things? The topic that had been suppressed in his heart for many years made him a little excited. He took a step forward and walked directly into the range of Li Honghe's sword energy. Answer me, if you were me, would you dare to bet? I wouldn't dare. Li Honghe finally spoke. His voice was dry and hoarse. I wouldn't dare either. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath and calmed down. And even if I dared, you might not be able to reverse everything at that time. The hundreds of years of affection between our two families may be as heavy as mountains and seas, but I have a clear conscience. If I hadn't taken action that year, everything that the Li family has today would be what the Wang family of Beihai has today. Maybe the Wang family of Beihai would be inferior to the Li family today, far inferior. Wang Tianzong said coldly, it was you who threatened the survival of the Wang family of Beihai. What choice did I have? If there was another choice, I wouldn't have let her besiege Li Kuangtu that year. When she just entered the invincible realm, she went to cooperate with Kunlun City to besiege Li Kuangtu. Both you and I should know what that means. That's the main reason why you hate me, right? Li Honghe said softly. She was beaten down to the invincible realm, and her injury has not healed yet. That was your most serious loss. If it hadn't happened, why would you be so tired all these years? You can think so. Wang Tianzong looked indifferent. The Li family wanted to annex the Wang family of Beihai, and I couldn't agree. Everything I did was with a clear conscience. But the Wang family was not destroyed, and she was beaten down to the invincible realm. In my eyes, that's all the grievances. He bowed to Li Honghe again and said softly, Senior Li, it was the Li family that taught me everything in the world. There is no right or wrong, only success or failure. I don't hate you. As long as you can walk through this sea of swords and appear in front of me, the grievances between the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai can be written off. His figure slowly disappeared in front of the sea of swords and became fainter and fainter. But his voice swept through the sky and echoed between heaven and earth. This is the 24 moves of sword that you taught me, and it's also my understanding of it. All my understanding has been turned into this move, break of reincarnation. Wang Tianzong said calmly, it's perfect to use the unique skill of the Li family to end the grievances with the Li family. Li Honghe looked at the sea of swords in front of him. The sea of swords was shaking, as if the sea was fluctuating. Huge waves were coming. A frenzy was coming. It was a pitch-black sea. Li Honghe's body lit up. Endless sword energy whistled in front of him and turned into the purest light. He turned around and looked at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was also looking at Li Honghe. The Wang family of Beihai is right. Li Honghe said softly. Li Tianlan, who had completely calmed down, nodded and said slowly, the Li family is right. It was only ambition that was wrong. And there was no absolute right or wrong in the world. There was only success or failure. Even if it was a grievance, it should be pure. I'll go to the other side of the sea and have a look. Li Honghe pointed to the sea of swords in front of him and said softly, if you have a chance, leave quickly and don't worry about anything else. He took a step forward. The extreme and pure light suddenly spread wildly with Li Honghe's straightened body. Above Lonely Mountain, the tides suddenly sounded. The boundless sea of swords was completely violent in an instant. The whole sea was completely lifted up, rushed up into the sky, and fell rapidly. Violent swords. Chaotic swords. The sword light shuttled through every corner of Lonely Mountain like a black tide, surging and raging. The light was still moving forward, slowly piercing the darkness. In the light, a little blood shot out. There was more and more blood. In the frozen space, the blood dyed the night red. The sword light shrouded Lonely Mountain. The moonlight shrouded West Lake. The broken bridge, the ancient tower, the lush flowers and plants, the clear water, the moonlight shone down. West Lake in the night was quiet and almost beautiful, like a picture scroll that should not exist in the world. Gu Xingyun stood quietly on the broken bridge. He was enjoying the scenery, but his whole mind was feeling the sword intent on Lonely Mountain. Lonely Mountain had become the only darkness in the night. The moonlight was completely shattered by the sword intent, and the whole Lonely Mountain was dark. The pure darkness was like a void. The lake water was turbulent in the sword intent. From far to near, the ripples in the water were spreading. The ripples grew bigger and bigger and turned into waves. The waves became billows. The billows became waves. The violent force was shaking in West Lake with Lonely Mountain as the center. The lake water was lifted up in the absolute force and spread over the lake. The sound of the water almost suppressed everything. Gu Xingyun stood on the bridge and looked across the lake to Lonely Mountain. It was getting darker and darker on Lonely Mountain. Gu Xingyun gently raised the corner of his mouth and said to himself, "It's really lively." No one responded to his words. The sword intent on Lonely Mountain became more and more fierce and violent. Suddenly, a dazzling light appeared in the absolute darkness. The light flashed away, and then it was completely suppressed by the darkness again. Gu Xingyun laughed out loud. He knew that Li Honghe had taken action. But what covered Lonely Mountain was the peak sword intent in the whole dark world for decades, which was almost irresistible. Even at his peak, Li Honghe might not be able to take this sword stroke. Now his strength might have broken through the peak, but his body was much worse. How could he block this sword stroke? The Li family is destined to be destroyed tonight. Gu Xingyun muttered to himself again. For you, this is really something to be happy about. A cold but soft voice suddenly sounded in Gu Xingyun's ear. But will what you hope really happen? Gu Xingyun suddenly turned around and looked at the sky behind him. A white figure appeared silently less than 20 meters behind him. The woman wore a long white dress, but she wore a golden mask that covered most of her beautiful face. She stood in the air. Her slender figure seemed to block the bright moon. So Gu Xingyun's eyes dimmed, and there was only a white shadow left in his eyes. Situ Tsangyue? Gu Xingyun raised his eyebrows and sneered. You dare to intervene in this matter? Why not? Situ Tsangyue said quietly. Do you think it's useful for you to come? Gu Xingyun sneered. His elegant face looked a little ferocious and distorted in the darkness. Tonight, the Li family will be destroyed, and no one can stop it. After the Li family, it will be your Sai city. No one can escape. The Li family will not be destroyed. Situ Tsangyue said softly. Even if Wang Tianzong can't kill him, I will. Gu Xingyun stopped smiling and said in a cold tone, Do you think you can stop Wang Tianzong? Or can you stop me? It's enough that I can deal with you. Situ Tsangyue's voice was neither fast nor slow. Gu Xingyun had completely calmed down and said lightly, What? Stuff? Fuck you madman. Gu Xingyun, who had just calmed down for less than a second, suddenly roared and rushed to the sky without hesitation. The moonlight was still bright, but the pale white moonlight completely dimmed in an instant. Heaven and earth were disappearing and going away. Situ Tsangyue's figure instantly became very clear in Gu Xingyun's sight. The white dress fluttered in the void. Gu Xingyun could see all the lines on the golden mask clearly. Situ Tsangyue's rosy and beautiful lips were tightly pursed, and her cold eyes had become determined and crazy in an instant. The moonlight was fading. Finally, it disappeared completely. Sound, waves, sword intent, light, all disappeared. In the dark void, only Gu Xingyun and Situ Tsangyue were left. Useless heaven and earth. This was the most powerful unique skill of Sai City. When Gu Xingyun's body slightly lost balance in Situ Tsangyue's domain, the 10th unique domain of Kunlun City had been fully opened. Situ Tsangyue raised her hand. His arm lit up with a devilish purple light that was powerful enough to shatter the void. The purple light turned into a small but ferocious hand cannon. Gu Xingyun's face was twisted and completely deformed. The distance between them was less than 50 meters. The famous murderous weapon-setting sun was dozens of meters away from Gu Xingyun. No hesitation, no hesitation. Situ Tsangyue didn't even think about it. She didn't waste time at all. The moment the purple hand cannon was formed, the muzzle was aimed at Gu Xingyun. She pulled the trigger. Boom. The silent void was broken. Heaven and earth were useless. The 10th unique domain. They were all broken. The entire extremely quiet world was completely occupied by the absolute roar in an instant. The violent sound occupied all hearing. The sky above the West Lake suddenly lit up with a purple light that pierced through heaven and earth. The purple light kept rising and dancing, breaking the broken bridge and evaporating the lake water. Gu Xingyun's body was directly blasted into the bottom of the lake by the murderous weapon. The whole West Lake was shaking violently. All the lake water within a radius of thousands of meters suddenly exploded under the shot. The monstrous waves directly surged to the sky thousands of meters high. The strong purple light blocked the moonlight and covered everything. The demonic purple chi was vast and mighty. Under the moonlight, on West Lake. Chapter 325. Gu Xingyun never expected that Situ Tsangyue would be so tough. For more than 20 years, Sai City had been hidden in the northeast. Situ Tsangyue, known as the hidden god of Zhongzhou State, was also one of the invincible realm experts in Zhongzhou State, but she rarely went down Mount Taibai. Since the establishment of Sai City 3 years ago, it seemed that Situ Tsangyue went down the mountain for the first time. Now it was the second time. In the long years, the once stunning woman seemed to be silent with the ice and snow on Mount Taibai. She seemed to have forgotten the whole world and kept silent, as if nothing had anything to do with her. Gu Xingyun and Wang Tianzong joined hands. They had thought that Situ Zhangyue would come, but neither of them expected that she would express her position so fiercely and resolutely. Among the 12 murderous weapons, Setting Sun's power was average, but its energy storage time was the fastest. It was the most suitable weapon for some forces with insufficient foundation. After all, no matter how weak the power of a murderous weapon was, it could directly threaten the life and death of an invincible realm expert. Situ Zhangyue and Gu Xingyun were only dozens of meters away. The distance was too close. The moment the setting sun finished storing energy and lit up, it had shattered the domains of the two invincible realm experts and directly exploded in front of Gu Xingyun's chest. For hundreds of years, since the appearance of the murderous weapon in the Dark World, this was the first time that a murderous weapon had fired at a person in its own country or force. Situ Zhangyue's action was so abrupt and determined that Gu Xingyun had no time to react. The surging purple light covered the whole lake, and the majestic power turned into a purple light beam visible to the naked eye. The deafening roar suppressed Gu Xingyun's furious roar. The destructive energy suppressed Gu Xingyun and directly blasted him to the bottom of the lake. Destroyed. Torn. Twisted. For the first time in his life, Gu Xingyun was so frightened. He could clearly feel the surging power tearing every inch of his flesh and blood, twisting his internal organs, as if it wanted to completely destroy his whole body here. He was hit by the murderous weapon at such a close distance, and the shadow of death instantly enveloped all his consciousness. He couldn't die. As the only pillar of Kunlun City now, how could he die here without any psychological preparation when Kunlun City had a bright future? Blood burst out from every corner of Gu Xingyun's body and turned into a blood mist, dyeing the lake red. Gu Xingyun's eyes also became red. The lake water was constantly surging in the chaotic energy. Through the clear water, Gu Xingyun could vaguely see Situ Zhangyue's white dress above the lake. He suddenly became extremely angry and resentful. This slut. Those who had been played by Li Guangtu were all bitches. Do you feel so good after being played by Li Guangtu? So much so that you couldn't forget it for more than 20 years? The muscles all over Gu Xingyun's body began to swell. Absolute power surged in his body, and his eyes were scarlet and tyrannical. He didn't want to die. At the very least, he didn't want to die in the hands of these lowly women. The purple light pressed against his chest. The violent destructive power bombarded Gu Xingyun at an unimaginable speed. Gu Xingyun opened his mouth and roared. He was at the bottom of the lake, but the moment he opened his mouth, all the lake water within a radius of 1,000 meters was instantly pushed out with him as the center. 9th Nether Impasse. 10th Unique Domain. The two domains of the 10 skills of true martial arts were constantly superimposed, and the deep lake suddenly began to boil and surge. Sword light appeared around Gu Xingyun. Layers of sword light flew wildly around him, like a blooming flower. The flower turned into a complicated sword formation. The sword formation suddenly formed a storm. The 8th Supreme Sword Dance. Countless sword lights whizzed and spun around him, layer after layer, without end. Gu Xingyun's body had been completely shrouded by the sword light, which was still rotating. Countless sword shadows passed through the void around Gu Xingyun, spread into the lake, and flew wildly in the area within a radius of 1,000 meters. The place where Gu Xingyun stood formed a tornado completely composed of sword light. The tornado spread at the bottom of the lake, and the whole lake surface was undulating in the storm. The surging and strange purple light kept rushing into the lake. West Lake turned purple in the night. The lake surface turned into a crazy whirlpool. The monstrous waves kept rising with purple light. Situ Zhangyue raised one hand high. The purple sun in her palm was constantly expanding. Looking from a distance, Situ Zhangyue, who was delicate and slim, seemed to be holding a sun in her hand. Gu Xingyun's cold roar had rushed out of the bottom of the lake. The purple light was still moving forward. But the sword light rotated and scattered the purple light. Then it drove the lake water to rotate and fly out again, condensing in Situ Zhangyue's hand. The power of the murderous weapon still existed. However, Gu Xingyun broke out regardless of the consequences. The defense of the 8th Supreme Sword Dance had reached the limit. The sword light formed a storm. Every time the storm rotated, it drove the power of the murderous weapon to be constantly reflected to Situ Tsangyue. Gu Xingyun used his own unique skill to force Situ Tsangyue to bear the power of the setting sun with him. Situ Tsangyue's face was pale. She raised her palm again. One hand became 2 hands. The purple sun above her hands was getting bigger and bigger. The surging waves of purple light had condensed into a huge ball in her hand, with Situ Tsangyue's own sword intent, Gu Xingyun's sword intent, and the power of the murderous weapon. The ball kept expanding. He borrowed the enemy's power for his own use. How familiar was this scene? All-embracing collection. There was only one word difference between this move and all-embracing collection, but their martial arts concepts were surprisingly consistent. However, compared with the unique skill of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, which was famous in the Dark World, Situ Tsangyue's all-embracing collection obviously could not make good use of the enemy's power. She could also borrow the enemy's power for her own use, but she was constantly bearing the power reflected by the enemy in the whole process. Situ Tsangyue. In an instant, Gu Xingyun's roar had sounded at the bottom of the lake and surged to the sky. The whole lake was almost completely overturned in the rotating storm of sword intent. The domain around Gu Xingyun continued to shrink and spread. He was covered in blood and was about to rush out of the lake. A touch of madness suddenly flashed in Situ Tsangyue's eyes. Her white dress was fluttering in the air. Her body suddenly tightened. The purple sun condensed on her hands flew out and was directly smashed to the bottom of the lake by her. The purple light was dazzling to the extreme in an instant. The moment the storm rushed out of the lake, the scorching sun fell. The whole West Lake seemed to be silent for a moment. For an eternal moment, everything seemed to freeze in an instant. Then it was the most thorough destruction. The dazzling lightning flashed in the surging lake water along with the purple light, and a mountain rose from the violent lake surface. The mountain rose abruptly, reaching a height of 1,000 meters. At the moment when the 10th unique domain and heaven and earth collided, the mountain rising from the lake seemed to be frozen in the void forever. The purple light flashed in the void, with the strongest power of the 2 invincible realm experts on the divine list, and suddenly exploded in the void. The mountain burst into pieces in an instant, with immeasurable sword intent and immeasurable light. There seemed to be the sound of a flash flood in the air. What rose from the lake in an instant was not a mountain at all, but a huge white wave that reached a height of 1,000 meters. The void disappeared, and the huge wave collapsed. The huge wave turned into a raging tide that could cover everything, surging and beating everything around it. The broken bridge, the flat ground, and the dense flowers and plants suddenly became broken and fragmented with the beating of the huge wave. In the area where the two fought, the area with a radius of 1,000 meters became a real absolute domain in an instant. The demonic purple light completely dimmed. Situ Tsangyue's white dress fluttered. Her body swayed in the air, and she suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. Gu Xingyun, who was covered in blood, suddenly rushed out of the lake. Without looking at Situ Tsangyue, he flew directly to the southwest. Far away from Lonely Mountain, the moonlight turned into a clear glow and shone down. It was lonely. Situ Tsangyue, whose face was pale, suddenly stood up straight in the air. Her figure flashed in the air, and there were suddenly countless residual shadows under the night sky. Her white clothes fluttered in the residual shadows. Instead of chasing Gu Xingyun, she rushed directly in the direction of Lonely Mountain. Around Lonely Mountain, the mountains and rivers had been completely connected by the sword intent. The violent sword intent formed a sea. The endless sword shadows turned into the water in the sea. Between the sword shadows, there were huge waves and surging tides. The sword shadows filled the top and bottom of Lonely Mountain, and there was no place to stand. This was a real overwhelming sword shadow that filled all the fields of vision. It shuttled back and forth endlessly. On Lonely Mountain, all the flowers and trees were torn apart, and huge cracks began to appear on the solid ground. The deep darkness became deeper and deeper. In front of Situ Tsangyue, there was nothing but swords and swords. Only those who saw the magnificent scene of this sword could really understand what the 4 words, Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State, meant. Sidu Zhongyue raised her head and looked at the top of the mountain. The top of the mountain was already a pure darkness without the slightest light. It enveloped everything as if it would never change. Sidu Zhongyue took a deep breath and stepped onto Lonely Mountain. Around her, thousands of sword shadows suddenly surged like a tide and rain, completely drowning her figure in an instant. Situ Zhongyue was climbing the mountain. Military Counselor was also climbing the mountain. However, when Sidu Zhongyue just started to take a step, Military Counselor had reached the top of the mountain. The top of Mount Dibing was the most magnificent. The endless vast palaces stretched all the way among the flowers and plants, and there were countless pavilions and terraces. Standing on the top of Mount Dibing, no matter from which angle, it was the most beautiful scenery. For the enemies of the Wang family of Beihai, the mountain was full of scenery. The foot of the mountain was full of traps. Climbing the mountain was more difficult than going to the sky. This sentence was the most suitable to describe Mount Dibing. Under this not-so-steep mountain, more than 50,000 elite troops were stationed almost all the year round. Moreover, they were well-equipped and had excellent cooperative combat ability. These 50,000 troops were the famous internal defense force of the Wang family of Beihai, an elite force that could be called a trump card in any country. The internal defense force of the Wang family of Beihai could monitor almost every corner of every road in Mount Dibing and make the fastest response in the shortest time. If any enemy wanted to enter Mount Dibing, it was impossible to bypass the internal defense force of the royal family. If it was a strong attack, even if the 50,000 troops could hold on for a while, it was enough to hold on until nearly 300,000 troops of the Beihai military region came to support. The Wang family of Beihai was very strong. The defense of Mount Dibing was very strong. But all this was meaningless for Military Counselor. The internal defense force could indeed monitor every corner outside the core area of Mount Dibing. But they couldn't stop the mole from the Wang family of Beihai. So he came to Mount Dibing. He even brought a full set of combat equipment. The plan is going well. In a palace on the top of Mount Dibing for guests, Military Counselor turned around and looked at his companions in front of him. If there is no problem, put on the equipment now. Our information is very reliable. The internal defense force will change shifts at 11 o'clock tonight. At that time, there will be about a 3-minute gap in their dispatch. Our friends in the Wang family of Beihai can buy us 2 minutes. Plus the time when we take action, the people on the top of the mountain give a warning and the first batch of elites of the internal defense force arrive at the top of the mountain. We can take action in about 10 minutes. He looked deeply at the figures standing side by side in the dark and said respectfully, "Do you have any questions?" "No problem." Beside Military Counselor, in the dark, there were 10 men in black lined up. They went up the mountain tonight and didn't intend to go down in one piece. They were men of sacrifice. No matter how high their martial arts realm was, men of sacrifice were men of sacrifice. Men of sacrifice didn't need to have problems. Their only task was to die. I can guarantee that everything you've done tonight will be worth it. For your former highness, for your current highness, and for your future highness. Saint walked out of the darkness and said solemnly, "Everything tonight is definitely worth it." Next to Saint stood the Duke and the General. Everyone stood in the darkness, their faces blurry and indistinct. The 10 men in black stood quietly and breathed steadily. "Put on the equipment." Military Counselor took a deep look at the 10 men of sacrifice in front of him and waved his hand. The men in black began to move. The 4 super masters of Samsara also moved. The equipment they needed tonight had been placed in the dark hall several days in advance, just waiting for their action tonight. Some experts of the Wang family of Beihai living on the top of Mount Dibing were also transferred to other places for some seemingly coincidental or inevitable reasons. Tonight's action was a plan made by the internal and external cooperation of the Wang family of Beihai. It had been prepared for a long time and now everything was ready. Military Counselor picked up his equipment. In the darkness, it was a black armor. The armor was extremely heavy and reflected a dim light in the darkness. The effect of this armor was almost zero in the actual combat. But tonight, it was destined to play a huge role. Larman elastic alloy. It was the latest research result of the Germanic military. It was a super strong alloy that could be used in the latest generation of main battle tanks, but now it was made into armor. The only advantage of the armor was that it was strong. It was strong and not easy to destroy. The disadvantage was that it was heavy. I hate this thing. The military advisor sighed and put on the armor that weighed more than 100 kilograms. Saint, General, Duke, and military counselor. The 4 super masters of Samsara all put on their equipment. The 10 black-clothed men donned armor and stood in a row again. It was already 11 o'clock in the evening. The 4 of us will wait here and give the last blow. Military counselor's body was in the armor. His voice buzzed in the hood. Everyone have a safe trip. Among the 10 men in black, the leader reached out his hand and patted his chest. Then he turned around and walked out of the hall. 10 men in black. Under the 10 metal helmets, there was a calm and indifferent face. They were not afraid of death, because in the hearts of the world, they had been dead for many years. Death was freedom. So they had been free for many years. They didn't care where they died, as long as their death was worthwhile. The 10 men walked out of the hall one by one. When they walked out of the hall, the man in black at the front turned around and looked at the 4 supermasters of Samsara in the darkness. Saint and military counselor stood at the front, looking solemn and solemn. They said one sentence respectively. Only 2 words. One sentence was, "Don't worry." One sentence was worth it. The man in black smiled. Under the hood, his face was a little blurred. Since it was worthwhile to die tonight, there was nothing to worry about. Maybe there were some regrets. They didn't see the day when the young master really ruled the dark world. As for death, there was really nothing to be afraid of. They had been dead for too many years. Their graves were now in Lin. Among the tombstones there were their names. The men in black turned around and began to move forward. They walked out of the hall that was specially used to receive guests. Ahead was the Emperor Hall, which symbolized the status on Mount Dibbing. It was different from the stage of Formidable Person, the Holy Land of Mount Dibbing. It was different from the World Palace. The Emperor Hall was where Wang Tianzong lived. It was located in the center of Mount Dibbing. Several core laboratories on Mount Dibbing, as well as some secret places such as underground munitions factories, were all behind the Emperor Hall. The eyes of the 10 men in black gradually became sharp. In the night, they sped up, faster and faster. Their armor, which weighed hundreds of kilograms, made a sound as they moved. 10 people. 3 people in a group. As the leader, the man in black was in his own group. The 10 people began to disperse. They began to run. They strode wildly. The ground on Mount Dibbing rumbled. Who? The guards on Mount Dibbing found the abnormality at the first time and instinctively raised the muzzle in their hands. But the 10 people in different directions did not slow down. With great power, they hit the guards and directly rushed to the Emperor Hall. Kill! The man in black in a single group suddenly roared. There seemed to be a muffled thunder on Mount Dibbing. The shining blue light suddenly rose to the sky. The thunder light was like a waterfall, directly covering the entire Emperor Hall. The light spread over Mount Dibbing. For a moment, the eyes of the 4 supermasters of Samsara were focused in front of the Emperor Hall. Wang Tianzong was not on Mount Dibbing. The Emperor Hall was the whole meaning of their action tonight. Endless thunder light continued to explode in the air. The sky seemed to turn blue. But in the suddenly focused eyes of military counselor Saint, the tall front door of the Emperor Hall opened quietly. In the blink of an eye, the dark blue curtain of night completely disappeared. There was a dim yellow between heaven and earth. Time seemed to be flowing backward from night to dusk. The dim yellow light enveloped the entire Emperor Hall. The sword light did not seem to appear, but in front of the Emperor Hall, there was sword light everywhere. Every ray of dim yellow light was a sword. An invincible sword. An extremely explosive sword. The man in black who rushed to the Emperor Hall first roared and melted in the dim yellow sword light. Then the brighter blue thunder light lit up, and the target was still the Emperor Hall. The dusk seemed to be flowing, and the sword light kept spreading. There seemed to be a sunset in the night. The sun was setting. The sword light in the night was brighter. A slim and beautiful figure flew out of the Emperor Hall and stood on the eaves above the Emperor Hall. The setting sun rose again in the night. The dim yellow light directly enveloped the entire Mount Dibbing in a flash. The night completely dissipated. The woman on the Emperor Hall waved her hand forward. In the night sky, the dim yellow light suddenly expanded and spread. It was silent, but so beautiful and so dangerous. The woman's long hair kept dancing in the sword light. At this moment, everyone saw her face. That beautiful face was full of coldness and majesty at this time. Summer solstice. Chapter 326. It was not the first time that military counselor had seen summer solstice. He was the second supermaster in the Samsara Palace. But if he took off his cloak and came to Mount Dibbing, the hostess of the Wang family of Beihai had to accompany Wang Tianzong, no matter how indifferent she was to the world. This was the minimum respect. Military counselor had been to Mount Dibbing before. Therefore, in his eyes, Xia Ji was an innocent, lively, and intelligent girl. She didn't have any schemes. Even though she was middle-aged, her heart was still as clear as glass and carefree. She was a woman who had been carefully protected and even spoiled by Wang Tianzong. She was so simple as if she lived in a fairy tale world. This was summer solstice in military counselor's eyes. But now, looking at the woman standing quietly above Emperor Palace, military counselor even felt that he had hallucinations. Summer solstice had no schemes. But she had a sword. She had a sword. She had majesty. That was indescribable strength and majesty. The dark night completely faded in front of Emperor Palace. The dim yellow sword light silently extended to every space in front of the palace. A large amount of sword light gathered and did not disperse, directly forming a setting sun above summer solstice. The setting sun became more and more blazing, so the sword intent became pure. This was another expert at the peak of the invincible realm in the Wang family of Beihai. The hostess, who had always played the role of a silly and sweet person in the Wang family of Beihai, might not be interested in strategies and general trends, and she had always enjoyed Wang Tianzong's pampering. It seemed that she had never done anything for the Wang family of Beihai. She didn't need to do anything. Just as Wang Tianzong said, she was beautiful, good at cooking, and could look after the house. Shouldn't a real hostess be like this? Even if she didn't do anything, as long as she was still in Mount Dibbing, Wang Tianzong would have no worries wherever he went. And did she really not do anything? No one knew. But at least Wang Tianzong knew. Many years ago, when he was about to break through to the invincible realm, if summer solstice hadn't gone to the border and made up for the vital combat capability of the invincible realm in the lineup to besiege Li Guangtu, it might not have been the Li family but the Wang family of Beihai who had committed treason and collapsed. If she hadn't tried her best to break Li Guangtu's murderous weapon, Infinite Sky, at the very beginning she wouldn't have been knocked down from the invincible realm, and she wouldn't have been seriously injured to this day. She had yet to recover from her injuries. But when Wang Tianzong was absent, she could still draw her sword. She had once fallen from the invincible realm, and her foundation had been completely loose. But after more than 20 years of accumulation, even if she was in a special state, when she pulled out the sword now, the sword intent that burst out was still at the peak of the invincible realm. Summer solstice stretched out her hand, her slender and white fingers grasped behind her. It was a famous sword of the Wang family of Beihai that had not been seen for many years. The body of the sword was slender and simple. The sword was named Autumn Water. The dim yellow sword light scattered in all directions, covering every corner in front of the Emperor Hall. The men of sacrifice who were determined to die were still charging forward. Everyone recognized Xia Ji's sword. In the dim sword light, it was the 24 moves of sword belonging to the Li family. Ninth Blade Dusk. With their background, dying under this sword was truly an indescribable irony and desolation. In an instant, the lightning in the dusky world became frenzied. The blue lightning bloomed densely, as if to tear the whole dusk apart. Summer Solstice's palm suddenly grasped the hilt of the sword. The sound of the long sword being unsheathed echoed over Mount Dibbing. The setting sun gathered at the end of the sword. Energy instantly leaped up again. The night had been completely dispelled. The top of Mount Dibbing was full of the dusk. The dusk gently shook. All the lightning was directly suppressed, and there was no sound. The autumn water behind summer solstice was unsheathed. The sword light was bright. The sword intent surged again. The dim yellow sword light seemed soft, but it quietly twisted the armor of all the men of sacrifice. Blood spurted out of the armor, reflecting in the dusk, which looked extremely cruel. The remaining group of men of sacrifice was still charging. Even if they were to die, they would die on the way of charging. Summer Solstice's cold and slightly dignified expression did not change at all, but her delicate eyebrows were slightly raised. The long sword autumn water was completely unsheathed. The sword light was brilliant. The dim dusk suddenly became chaotic and violent. High up in the sky, the setting sun gathered a lot of rich sword energy and went straight up as the bright sword light was unsheathed. The dusk dissipated in the frenzy. The light on Mount Dibbing multiplied, suppressing the lights, getting brighter and brighter. It was already late at night in Beihai province. But Mount Dibbing lit up with real light. Sunshine. The setting sun gathered by the sword intent had completely turned into a scorching sun. Flowers bloomed under the scorching sun. Summer Solstice's graceful body rotated wildly with the sword, like a grand but extremely dangerous dance. The monstrous sword light spread like a flower. Summer Solstice rotated faster and faster. The scorching sun in the sky had completely disappeared, and the light on Mount Dibbing was even brighter. A little flame appeared at the tip of Summer Solstice's sword. As her figure danced, the flames suddenly created a wave of fire that could cover everything. The monstrous sword light raged with the raging fire. The last group of men of sacrifice didn't even have time to do anything. They were directly swallowed by the fire wave and turned into nothingness in the sword intent all over the sky. The eighth blade, burning sky. Summer Solstice's body shook. The spreading fire began to converge toward her. On the top of Mount Dibbing, in the gathering fire, a touch of snow suddenly rose. The moment the sword light as cold as snow lit up, Mount Dibbing was full of thunder. The violent blue electric arcs covered everything without warning. Just at the moment when Summer Solstice withdrew her sword and relaxed. This was a real sneak attack and assassination. The means were not despicable and insidious, but the timing was just right. Saint broke open the alloy armor on his body. This was his fastest sword, and also his strongest sword in the state of Holy Disciple. The sword intent of this sword was still at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, but its destructive power seemed to have entered the invincible realm. Military Counselor was a little slower than Saint. General and Duke rushed up side by side. Thunderlight. There was only thunderlight. The thunderlight all over the mountains and plains was completely connected, like a sky covering the night sky, directly shrouding Summer Solstice. Summer Solstice's dress fluttered wildly in the violent sword intent. She held autumn water tightly in her hand, pointed the sword down, and suddenly stabbed into the Emperor Palace under her feet. From the moment she appeared to the present, she only made 3 sword moves. The moment the third sword move was made, Summer Solstice's aura instantly became weak. But the invisible and intangible sword intent smashed the thunderlight all over the sky in an instant. The setting sun dissipated. The scorching sun dissipated. The thunder light dissipated. The top of Mount Dibbing became the purest and deepest black, and only the sword intent was whistling in the quietest darkness. The unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai. Sword of King Wei. In the thick darkness, there was a clear sound of weapons breaking. The sword light swept over Mount Dibbing. The thunder light lit up in the darkness for a moment, and then disappeared completely. Summer Solstice tightly pursed her red lips and endured it. Her cold eyes looked directly to the east of Mount Dibbing. In the night that was restored to peace, 2 figures, each carrying a figure, staggered and disappeared into the night. The wind on Mount Dibbing blew over. The sound of the waves at the foot of the mountain also became clear. The corner of Summer Solstice's mouth moved. She couldn't help spitting out a mouthful of blood, which dyed the eaves of Emperor Palace red. She looked at her blood with complicated eyes. The sneak attack tonight was nothing to her. She was at the peak of the invincible realm. Except for the experts at the peak of the invincible realm, almost no one could hurt her. No one could hurt her tonight. However, her body could no longer bear the burden of her own sword intent. Summer Solstice sighed softly. Her figure flickered and returned to Emperor Palace. The internal security forces of the Wang family of Beihai, who reacted the fastest, had already rushed to the top of the mountain. But they only saw the door of Emperor Palace slowly closing. "It's okay." Summer Solstice's cold and indifferent voice came from inside. "Don't inform Tianzong." The sword energy on Mount Dibing fell. The sword energy on Mount Dibing had reached its peak. The sword intent was like the sea. The sky and the sea were aligned. In the deep and silent darkness, Mount Dibing, West Lake, and everything else seemed to have completely disappeared. Only the turbulent sea of swords was left. Vibration. The whole Mount Dibing was shaking under the completely violent sword intent. The whole sea of swords had gone completely crazy. The vast sword intent fell endlessly in the air, and the sword energy rose into the sky. The mighty sword shadows shuttled in every corner of Mount Dibing. The flowers, plants, and trees on Mount Dibing, which had been nourished by the fate of the dragon vein, had been completely shattered and disappeared in the turbulence of the Sea of Swords. The once flourishing Mount Dibing was now only a bare mountain. The mountain gradually cracked in the raging sword intent, and the endless sword shadows did not seem to have a tendency to dissipate and reduce at all. Instead, there were more and more. Li Honghe moved forward slowly in the Sea of Swords. His pace was extremely steady, but also extremely slow. He didn't know where Wang Tianzong was. But he knew Wang Tianzong's character. So he went straight forward. As long as he went forward to the end, no matter where Wang Tianzong was, he could see him. The sword intent was like a tsunami. The surging tide rose. The surging tide fell. Li Honghe had walked hundreds of meters in the Sea of Swords. His body was always shining. The extremely rich sword intent turned into the purest light. Li Honghe was like a ball of light in the Sea of Swords. He was moving forward. The Sea of Swords was retreating. Mount Dibing, which had been ravaged by the infinite sword energy, had been unrecognizable. Everything had disappeared, including flowers, trees, and wooden houses. Wherever the sword energy passed, the land was completely dried up, and all the water was completely evaporated. Cracks appeared on the dry land one after another. The cracks spread from the top of the mountain and gradually spread to the foot of the mountain. The Li family cemetery was the only intact place on Mount Dibing. Li Honghe was standing in front of the cemetery and moving forward. He was moving forward. The Sea of Swords was retreating. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of sword shadows hit the ball of light around Li Honghe without reservation. Blood bloomed all over Li Honghe's body. But the overwhelming sea of swords that swept through Mount Dibing kept retreating. It kept retreating. Countless sword shadows were thrown into the sky messily and fell back again. There were more and more sword shadows. The light around Li Honghe was getting brighter and brighter. All the sword shadows were lifted up by him along the way. A huge wave of thousands of meters high had appeared in front of Li Honghe. They were all swords. There were so many swords that made people desperate. The edge of the sword flashed with dark and deep light. The sword energy surrounded it, and the reincarnations seemed to be endless. The sword energy was like a sea. This was not Wang Tianzong's 6 paths of reincarnation, but it was definitely a sword strike with all his strength. With the Howren sword energy in this sword strike alone, he deserved to be ranked first on the divine list. Li Honghe was still moving forward. His speed gradually accelerated. So the Sea of Swords was retreating, but the huge wave at the front was getting higher and higher. Thousands of meters. It was getting higher and higher. It seemed to go straight to the sky. Li Honghe walked silently. The light on his body was constant, as if he was going to overturn the whole Sea of Swords by himself. The Sea of Swords was like a storm, like a huge wave, with its sharpness shocking the world and endless. There was more and more blood on Li Honghe's body. His aura began to weaken, but the sword intent around him was getting stronger and stronger. Li Tianlan watched all this quietly. The sea of swords was forced back by Li Honghe in front of him. Li Tianlan's position was absolutely safe. He watched the sword light sweep through the world like a tide. He watched the blood burst out on his grandfather's body. He watched the huge wave that could split the sky keep rising. He watched a large number of sword shadows break and reunite. He just watched. His eyes were calm. Calm without the slightest emotion. This was the broken reincarnation he had never seen before. The sword energy was as abundant as the sea. And Li Honghe had the power to overturn the whole sea of swords. Li Tianlan had already seen the outcome of this battle. There was no face-to-face battle in this battle. It was purely a contest between sword intent and sword energy. His grandfather could overturn the whole sea of swords, but he couldn't completely defeat it. When the whole sea of swords was overturned, it was also the moment when the sea of swords was completely overturned. At that time, the sea would become the sky. The unprecedented sword intent would completely burst out in the most brilliant way. Li Tianlan didn't know what he could do at that time. But he wanted to try. He had to try. Li Honghe's speed was getting faster and faster. The light formed by the sword intent around him gradually became erratic and unstable. But in the light, the sword intent was suddenly much stronger than before. A large number of sword shadows flew backward in front of him, drifting like fallen leaves. A clear and long whistle suddenly sounded in the heavy sea of swords. The long whistle came from the foot of Lonely Mountain. But the sound that was enough to break gold and stone reached the top of the mountain in an instant. People at the foot of the mountain climbed up. The sword shadows all over Lonely Mountain surged down the mountain at the same time. Standing in Li Honghe's position, he couldn't see Situ Zhongyue at the foot of the mountain. But in an instant, he was able to grasp the changes in the sea of swords at the foot of the mountain. Brilliant, like eternal pure light, suddenly lit up on him. The extremely dazzling light shone in the endless sea of swords. Li Honghe's figure suddenly rose into the sky. His figure kept moving forward. The pure light spread unscrupulously in front of him. The whole Lonely Mountain became a world of black and white in the blink of an eye. Li Honghe's body flew in the sea of swords. He had no sword in his hand. However, his entire person had turned into the sharpest sword. Brilliant, like eternal light, was broken in the darkness. The sword intent around Li Honghe condensed, leaving only sharpness. 23rd blade, break eternity. The endless sea of swords began to go berserk like never before. The neat sword shadows were swept away by the condensed sword intent to the extreme and rushed into the sky in disorder. The sword shadows gathered like dragons and kept attacking the sword intent around Li Honghe. Then they were swept away again. The sea was undulating, and the whole sea was rising. Forward. He kept moving forward. Li Honghe seemed to have completely incarnated into a sword. The sea of swords was lifted up, and the monstrous waves rushed into the sky. Li Honghe didn't stop at all and rushed directly to the end of the sea. There was no Wang Tianzong at the end of the sea. But Li Honghe saw Situ Zhongyue covered in blood. The sword shadows around Situ Zhongyue were rising. The entire sea of swords rose into the air after a brief moment of chaos. One after another, the sword shadows were neatly arranged again. The sea of swords became the sky. It was a sky with a radius of thousands of meters, covering the whole Lonely Mountain. Looking up, the inverted sword shadows were dense and scattered all over the sky. Li Honghe, whose breath was constantly weakening, had only a dignified look in his eyes. There was a breeze on Lonely Mountain. The endless sword shadows in the sky shimmered in the wind. The light lit up one by one. A weak light, a sharp light, and a cold light. The light occupied all of Li Honghe's vision, like stars all over the sky. Wang Tianzong's voice finally sounded in the nothingness again. It was simple. Senior Li, goodbye. The stars began to fall. They rolled down like the collapsing and pouring Milky Way. His face changed dramatically, and he took a step forward subconsciously. A faintly discernible sigh suddenly rang out in the flourishing galaxy. Then a sword intent that was almost similar to but not exactly the same as the Milky Way appeared on Lonely Mountain and beside Li Honghe without warning. The Milky Way was falling. The ground lit up. The shining light could almost cover everything. The light below was as far as the Milky Way above was. The light and the falling Milky Way kept merging, neither advancing nor retreating. The dazzling light gradually became soft and cold. A slender and elegant figure appeared in front of Li Honghe and Tangyu. He was bathed in light and completely protected the two behind him. The shining Milky Way was still falling. It became more and more determined. The cold and soft light enveloped the whole Lonely Mountain, shining and rippling against the falling character. The light was as cold as the moon, coldly accommodating the falling stars from the sky. In the high sky of the nothingness, Wang Tianzong's voice sounded again with faint anger. Fengting, are you going to intervene? Lin Fengting. Li Tianlan froze for a moment. Sidu Zhongyue also froze for a moment. Everyone in the Li family was a little stunned. I have no choice. In the light, Lin Fengting's voice sounded. His voice was calm and emotionless, just like his mood. Wang Tianzong fell silent. He had no choice. He understood this sentence. There was no choice and there was no way out. Everything he did was something he had to do. Wang Tianzong's figure appeared high in the sky. The star-like sword shadows were still falling wildly. Wang Tianzong stood high in the sky, as if stepping on the stars. He glanced at Lin Fengting. In the light, even he could not see Lin Fengting's expression. His figure fell for a while. The bright and shining sword shadows became as black as ink in an instant. That was the deepest and purest black. The vast night sky seemed to be torn apart in an instant, and it rained in the nothingness. It was the wildest rainstorm in the dark world in decades. The heavy rain fell with a crash. Lin Fengting still stood where he was. But the light formed by the sword intent around him was constantly rising. The light was constantly changing, turning into the most holy milky white. The milky white light enveloped the whole Lonely Mountain and continued to rise, like a white torrent breaking through the darkness. Lin Fengting reached for the money. His 5 fingers were all open, as if he could control everything. The milky white light completely dispersed with his movements, and suddenly turned into 2 long rivers flowing in the nothingness. The long river crossed the night sky with different colors. It was as cold as the bright moon. It was as hot as the sun. The light of the sun and the moon spread wildly in the dark black tide at the same time. The Lonely Mountain in the night was instantly illuminated as bright as day. The sun and the moon were blending and converging, rising and falling in the black tide all over the sky. The black tide was still surging. Chapter 327. The sun and the moon rose and fell. The black tide was turbulent and violent. Over Lonely Mountain, it was like a rainstorm that fell late at night but was illuminated by the sun and the moon at the same time. The heavy rain fell overwhelmingly. The surging sword intent was deep and dark, but it was clear and sharp under the light of the sun and the moon. Extreme light and darkness intertwined. Everything on Lonely Mountain was like a phenomenon of heaven and earth. Lin Fengting did not move. Wang Tianzong did not move. But the completely different sword intent kept spreading, and it kept surging in every corner of the entire Lonely Mountain. This was the confrontation and entanglement at the peak of martial arts. The broken reincarnation had completely disappeared. The black tide and the sun and the moon were all sword intent. There was no unique skill, but the purest and most violent sword intent. The black tide, the rainstorm, the cold moon, the scorching sun, they were all swords. The so-called light and darkness. The so-called phenomenon of heaven and earth. They were all swords. Li Tianlan stared at every scene of the flowing light in front of him. His body was trembling slightly, and a trace of excitement gradually appeared on his pale face. His body subconsciously took a few steps forward, and his eyes were even a little intoxicated. He could no longer see the light and darkness. There was only sword intent in his eyes. If the essence of the world was silence, If the peak of martial arts was illusion, in the silence and illusion, sword moves, sword energy, everything could not exist. In sword arts, only the purest sword intent and sword momentum were the only real. Li Tianlan's world was quiet, and his sight was all illusion. So the seemingly colorful but extremely pure sword intent became the most gorgeous and magnificent picture in his eyes. Li Tianlan sat down. If the peak of martial arts was illusion, it was meaningless to see it or not. He closed his eyes. In the blink of an eye, he directly entered the deepest level of meditation. The endless sword intent became clearer and clearer in his conscious perception. At this moment, he seemed to be touching the essence of the sword intent of the Wang family of Beihai and the Lin clan. The essence of sword intent. The sword intent of the 24 moves of sword was far greater than that of the Wang family of Beihai, and its light was like the sun and the moon. But the sun and the moon would also be silent, silent in the pure darkness. Any light that could dissipate in the darkness was illusion. Only darkness was real. Therefore, although the martial arts of the Wang family of Beihai was not as grand as the 24 moves of sword, it was far more real than the 24 moves of sword. Reality and illusion. This was the essence of the highest level of martial arts, surpassing the level of sword intent, the strength of defense, and all other basic essences. This was the first time Li Tianlan had seen the truth. Illusions could reach the end of martial arts. You can be real too. At this moment, Li Tianlan suddenly thought of deity he met in heaven capital. Thinking of his sword light that was as vast as the sun and moon, thinking of his truth that was as dark as eternity. He had touched upon the path of the strongest martial arts, but he could no longer reach the end. It was only at this moment that he vaguely understood the ambition of God. Every one of them had talent comparable to a genius. The world wouldn't exist just for one person. Everyone had the potential to become a true prodigy. Li Tianlan sat quietly. He seemed to have fallen into the deepest state of nirvana. The entanglement of the black tide and the sun and the moon seemed to be endless. Li Tianlan's figure began to disappear in the sword intent all over the mountains and plains. In a trance, he seemed to have completely left the lock of Wang Tianzong and Lin Fengting's sword intent. It was a great victory. It had been 3 years. Li Tianlan hadn't really shown his strength after his return, but his martial arts had taken half a step forward. This half step was very small. But it had an extraordinary meaning. At this moment, Li Tianlan sat there. His figure had never been blurred, but it had never been clearer. It was like heaven and earth. It was always the most real existence. But because it was too grand, it would always be subconsciously ignored. Wang Tianzong noticed Li Tianlan's change at the first time. Above the black tide, a sharp and cold snort sounded like thunder. In an instant, the black rain all over the sky stopped. The rain-like sword shadows all stopped around the light of the sun and the moon. The sword shadows began to gather wildly. The sword sea turned into a starry sky. The starry sky turned into a rainstorm. The rainstorm turned into a sword sea again. All the sounds on Lonely Mountain disappeared completely. The despairing silence began to spread, and only the sun and the moon remained the same. Looking from a distance, the sword sea was like a dark halo flowing around the sun and the moon, covering the entire Lonely Mountain. Li Tianlan didn't move. Lin Fengting's expression suddenly became extremely serious. Tianzong, do you have to do this? Lin Fengting said in a deep voice. The cause of the past is the effect of today. I have no choice. Wang Tianzong's voice was cold. In fact, cause and effect were no longer important. It didn't matter whether the Li family owed the Wang family of Beihai or not. Li Honghe might feel guilty to the Wang family of Beihai. But it would not change anything. Since there was no turning back, he could only make the best of the mistake. Right and wrong could not decide everything. After all, the enemy could only be the enemy. The endless sea of swords rippled for a moment. Countless sword shadows trembled. Around the light of the sun and the moon, the sword sea formed a wave. The wave did not spread outward. Instead, it collapsed inward. In a trance, There was a storm between heaven and earth in the huge tide. An indescribable storm swept through everything along with an earth-shattering boom. The darkness began to become more real than ever. The densely packed sword shadows became extremely crazy in an instant. The storm destroyed everything in the sword shadows. The monstrous black tide rushed towards the sun and the moon in the center without any hesitation. All the sword intent poured out in the most violent way in an instant. The sword sea was collapsing, and the sun and the moon were expanding. The entire lonely mountain was shaking and cracking in the extreme outbreak of sword intent. The light of the sun and the moon spread out to the limit. All the sounds disappeared completely in an instant. Only the storm and the tide were still the same. A dazzling white spot suddenly lit up in the center of the sun and the moon. In the silent world, the sun and the moon seemed to explode completely. The white spot suddenly became a dazzling light everywhere. The light swallowed the darkness. The darkness shattered the light. A void appeared in the sky where light and darkness intertwined. The void was formed and shattered. Light and darkness intertwined. The whole sky became mottled with black and white intertwined. In the absolute chaos, Lin Fengting seemed to move. He took a step forward. But the landing point was not in front of him, but directly appeared in the sky thousands of meters above. Wang Tianzong also moved. For the first time, there was a harsh sound of gold and iron colliding in the air. The two long swords seemed to have collided once, but no one could see it clearly. The mottled black and white sky surged and exploded. A blazing white halo appeared in the sky, and all the sword intent kept spreading out in the halo. The mountain collapsed and the earth cracked. This was a real mountain collapsed and the earth cracked. There was only light and darkness in the soaring sword intent, and nothing could be seen clearly. The violent sword intent finally began to dissipate. A large amount of smoke and dust spread after the sword intent, covering the field of vision. The smoke and dust gradually dissipated. Li Tianlan was still sitting. Li Tianlan stood in front of Li Honghe and Sidu Cangyue. Everyone seemed to have changed their positions, but also seemed to have not changed. Only Wang Tianzong was still floating in the air, cold and majestic, like a god. Lonely Mountain. There was no Lonely Mountain anymore. The whole Lonely Mountain was cut to the ground by this sword. Everything that used to be completely disappeared and no longer existed. Only the Li family's cemetery remained after Lin Fengting's sword light. But only the cemetery was left. The whole Lonely Mountain seemed to have never existed. The ground of Lonely Mountain, which had become flat, was still cracking. Horrifying cracks appeared one after another on the wall. Wisps of white mist rose from the cracks. The mist appeared quickly, but it never condensed. All the mist seemed to have a master. As soon as it appeared, it began to gather toward Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was surrounded by mist, and everything became blurred. 3 years ago, Great Master Wei planted a flower. It was called the Dragon Vein Flower. That flower was the key to Li Tianlan's resurrection. The flower was picked, but its roots disappeared in Mount Qingyun and became the flourishing flowers and plants of the whole Lonely Mountain. Now that Lonely Mountain completely disappeared, the remaining luck suddenly turned into white mist again and began to gather toward Li Tianlan. Wang Tianzong watched all this quietly. His eyes narrowed tightly, and for the first time, there was a touch of undisguised fear and killing intent in his eyes. Now Li Tianlan was still weak. But his future was worthy of everyone's real attention. In Wang Tianzong's eyes, Li Tianlan was no longer a threat. He was an opponent. He was a real enemy. Wang Tianzong took a step forward in the air. One step was 100 meters, and he almost reached Li Tianlan. Do you want to make another sword move? Lin Fengting blocked Wang Tianzong's way forward. His face was a little pale, but his aura was still strong. In the final collision, although Lonely Mountain completely disappeared, the Li family still existed. The people of the Li family and the Li family's cemetery survived because they were shrouded by his sword intent. This was the first time that Lin Fengting had completely shown his attitude. When the Li family was destroyed, he didn't know. After the Li family was destroyed, everything was too late. After more than 20 years, Lin Fengting finally stood in front of the Li family. No right or wrong. The dark world didn't need right or wrong or understanding. Only cause and effect were the most real. Fengting, is this your attitude? Wang Tianzong looked into Lin Fengting's eyes. Yes. Lin Fengting said calmly. Is this also the attitude of the Lin clan? Wang Tianzong asked again. Lin Fengting narrowed his eyes. He didn't know the meaning of Wang Tianzong's words. This could be understood as a threat. It could also be understood as a simple inquiry. Lin Fengting suddenly smiled. If you really want to understand it in this way, it's not impossible. The Wang family of Beihai was indeed powerful. They deserved to be called the first force in the dark world. Although the headquarters of the Lin clan stood aloof from the world. But with the branches scattered all over the world, it was also a giant. Even if Lin Fengting could barely integrate the branches everywhere, there would be many internal problems. But there were also internal problems in the Wang family of Beihai. Wang Tianzong's pupils contracted, and he said in a deep voice, "Why? I have no choice." Lin Fengting shook his head. Wang Tianzong knew that he had asked a nonsense question. Since there was no choice, anything he said was nonsense. The famous sword of the Wang family of Beihai behind him, "Listen to the sea," shook slightly. The bright sword blade suddenly came out of the sheath. Lin Fengting suddenly raised his eyebrows. This peak invincible realm expert, who had always been playing in the world and seemed to live outside the mortal world, was always free and easy. But as he raised his eyebrows, there was a trace of indescribable sharpness in him. "Do you want to fight again?" Lin Fengting asked. "You are no match for me." Wang Tianzong's tone was straightforward and calm. He was stronger than Lin Fengting. Whether it was much stronger or slightly stronger, strength was strength. All the people of the Li family walked over quietly. In Wang Tianzong's eyes, they might be nonentities. But here, there was no room for them to retreat. The earth-shattering sword strike just now was enough to leave a huge shadow on them. But the nonentities in the shadow could also become warriors. Li Honghe, who was covered in blood, also came over. Situ Zhongyue followed him. Wang Tianzong was still calm. It was a calmness of absolute confidence. The only purpose of his coming to Lin today was to kill Li Honghe, end the feud with the Li family, and eliminate the threat that the Li family might bring to the Wang family of Beihai in the future. He had noticed that Gu Xingyun had withdrawn from the battlefield. But it didn't matter. Even if Lin Fengting stood in front of him at this time. But he could still kill Li Honghe. Why didn't he? Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes and glanced at Li Tianlan, who was still sitting on the ground. The white mist had gradually thinned. Li Tianlan also opened his eyes at the same time. His eyes were calm and deep, and he looked at Wang Tianzong quietly. Wang Tianzong was motionless, as if he was thinking. Li Tianlan seemed to want to say something, but before he finished speaking, he spat out a mouthful of blood and dyed the dry land red. Wang Tianzong's pupils suddenly contracted. Li Tianlan reached out his hand and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He chuckled and said, "Comfortable. I still underestimated you." Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan and said softly. His voice sounded like a sigh. His sword intent hurt Li Tianlan at the very beginning. But the blood just now was because Li Tianlan was watching his and Lin Fengting's sword intent and hurting his mind. It was not a serious problem. At least compared with the understanding he got, this kind of injury was much lighter. A young man in his early 20s could see the essence of the peak sword intent of swordsmanship. Wang Tianzong felt that he had underestimated Li Tianlan too much. The title of the heavenly son of Zhongzhou state did seem to be worthy of it. Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan quietly. Li Tianlan saw the essence of the supreme swordsmanship. He also vaguely saw Li Tianlan's path. When did you recultivate the 4 realms of martial arts? Wang Tianzong suddenly asked. Li Tianlan's eyes slightly narrowed. 3 years ago. It only took 3 years? Wang Tianzong raised his eyebrows. It was 2 years. Li Tianlan said. Wang Tianzong's mouth twitched. The time is too short. The foundation is unstable. There is still time in the future. Li Tianlan's tone was calm. Wang Tianzong had nothing to say. He recultivated the 4 realms of martial arts in 2 years. Li Tianlan's foundation was indeed unstable. But Li Tianlan took the 4 realms of martial arts as the most basic foundation and starting point, directly jumped out of the 4 realms of martial arts and embarked on a new path. The 4 realms of martial arts were everyone's road to invincibility, but for Li Tianlan, they became the initial foundation. The foundation was unstable? Even if it was unstable, it was much more stable than others. Would you like to join the Wang family of Beihai? Wang Tianzong was silent for a while and then asked. He asked without changing his expression. The Wang family of Beihai has never owed the Li family anything. As long as you are willing to join the Wang family of Beihai, all the grievances can be written off, and I can give you the power to be on an equal footing with Xianxia. Wang Tianzong's tone was calm and solemn. Li Honghe's face suddenly changed, and he said subconsciously, the Li family will not be anyone's vassal. His tone was a little fast, a little hasty, and even a little out of control. The Li family? Wang Tianzong twitched the corner of his mouth with a faint smile. He didn't look at Li Honghe, but at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was looking at his grandfather who was covered in blood. He slowly walked to Li Honghe's side, held the old man who was shaking a little, and whispered, "The blood can't be shed in vain." That was his answer. Wang Tianzong's eyes flashed. Lin Fengting, Li Honghe, Xianxia, plus more than a dozen elites from the Li family. And Li Tianlan. Wang Tianzong kept calculating in his heart. He couldn't kill Lin Fengting. He didn't want to kill him. But if he wanted to kill others, Lin Fengting might not be able to stop him. The premise was that he was willing to pay the price. The price might be heavy, but compared with the Li family, which was more important? The temperature in Wang Tianzong's eyes gradually decreased, and he began to become determined. You refused me again. Wang Tianzong looked at Li Tianlan. I'm just telling a fact. Li Tianlan said, until now, I've determined my future path, or the path of the East Emperor Palace. He looked at Wang Tianzong. He suddenly smiled and said, Your Majesty, after the maneuver, the East Emperor Palace will go to Wuxia to develop. How about that? Wuxia Province. The stability of the Southeast Group was second only to Beihai Province. That was the absolute base camp of Beihai Province, the real back garden. It seemed that the East Emperor Palace was courting death by going to Wuxia. But Wang Tianzong's calm face twisted in an instant. This was a declaration of war. Li Tianlan declared war on the Wang family of Beihai. Moreover, the location he had chosen was so subtle. Are you going to Wuxia? Wang Tianzong asked. How about it? Li Tianlan's tone was calm. No. Before Wang Tianzong could speak, a young and cold female voice suddenly sounded. A white figure walked up the lonely mountain, which had become a piece of flat land. Chapter 328. Li Tianlan instinctively looked in the direction of the sound. The sword intent on the flattened, lonely mountain dissipated, but some sword energy still remained. The broken and out-of-control sword intent filled every corner of the surroundings bit by bit. The night was slightly turbulent, and the starlight fell. Everything in sight was a little blurred in the faint light. In his sight, the long white dress gently fluttered in the night breeze, with a delicate fragrance that Li Tianlan was familiar with but almost forgotten. In a trance, this picture was as beautiful as the most beautiful dream. Li Tianlan froze in place. His heart beat wildly and his mind was blank. He stared at the figure getting closer and closer to him. Qin Weibai. Li Tianlan had imagined the scene of the two meeting again many times. But in any case, he did not expect that when he was most unprepared, she would appear in front of him so suddenly and naturally. His body was stiff, and the corners of his mouth trembled slightly, but he could not say a word. The residual broken sword energy all over the sky was still a scenery in his eyes. And the slim white figure walked in the residual sword intent, but it seemed that all the scenery was completely lit up in an instant. Qin Weibai was still so simple, but so perfect. Her long hair was tied up, and a green emerald hairpin was inserted in her hair casually. It swayed with her hurried footsteps, with intoxicating brilliance. Lonely Mountain, which had been razed to the ground by a sword, was desolate and dilapidated. The sword energy drifted around casually. The bare and almost dead land did not hide her charm at all. Instead, it made her look more dreamy and dazzling. She walked to Li Tianlan. Everything became clear. A clear face. A clear, delicate fragrance. She looked at Li Tianlan. It was a beauty and gentleness that could topple the night sky and make the stars dim. Her eyes were still a little eager, but she always paid attention to her tone. "You can't go to Wuyue," she said softly, not forcefully, but with a kind of softness similar to coquettishness. Li Tianlan looked at Qin Weibai motionlessly. It had been 3 years since the final battle of Heaven Capital. He had never seen her again, nor had he heard from her. It was just like when she walked into his world quietly and left without saying a word. Li Tianlan felt that he could only accept everything she did. He could not refuse her approach, nor could he stop her from going away. He could only accept it? Li Tianlan took a deep breath and looked at Qin Weibai, who appeared in front of him again. She was so close. She was so close that as long as he reached out, he would be able to pull her into his arms. She told him not to go to Wuyue. The corners of Li Tianlan's mouth moved. His voice became extremely dry, emotionless, and even devoid of warmth. "Why?" he asked. Qin Weibai's face suddenly turned pale. Wang Tianzong and Lin Fengting raised their eyebrows at the same time. What Li Tianlan asked was why. Not why. It was a difference of one word, but it was two completely different emotions. "I don't want you to go to Wuyue," Qin Weibai whispered. Li Tianlan smiled. "You don't want to," he recalled everything about him and Qin Weibai. She wanted to walk into her own world, so she became her own woman. She wanted him to enter Sai City, so she became the young governor of Sai City. She wanted to distance herself from him. As a result, the several heavenly kings of Samsara in Tiandu quietly disappeared before the decisive battle. After the decisive battle, she didn't want to have the slightest connection with his future, so she completely cut off all connections between him and her. Now she appeared in front of him again and said that she didn't want him to go to Wuyue. She expressed what she wanted or didn't want in the most direct way, which was sometimes gentle, but sometimes so cruel. Li Tianlan suddenly found himself so powerless. He couldn't resist Qin Weibai's gentleness, nor could he stop her cruelty. He didn't like this feeling of being controlled, approached, and abandoned from beginning to end. He never had the feeling of being in charge. He didn't understand Qin Weibai's choice every time, but he really cared about her too much. The more he cared about her, the more dissatisfied he was. Li Tianlan's heart gradually became quiet. He felt that his body began to cool down inch by inch from his fingertips. His limbs, torso, heart, and even his voice became extremely cold. "For you?" He looked at Qin Weibai and asked. This sentence was like an extremely sharp knife, cutting open his chest in an instant and leaving a bloody scar on his heart. It hurt, but it was almost twisted with pleasure. "My future has nothing to do with you. Then when you stand in front of me, who are you? Who are you?" Qin Weibai's face suddenly lost all the blood. Li Tianlan turned directly, looked at Wang Tianzong, and said word by word, "I will go to Wuyue after the maneuver." The pale Qin Weibai said again, "You can't go to Wuyue. You will die." "For you?" Li Tianlan didn't look back and asked the same question. This cruel question seemed to be dripping blood. "I'm your wife. I won't let you go to Wuyue. You can't go." Qin Weibai bit her lip and took a step forward, directly hugging Li Tianlan from behind. "Don't be angry with me, okay? I won't allow you to go to Wuyue, please." She pulled Li Tianlan hard with her small hands, as if she wanted to turn his body around. "Hug me, I won't make you angry in the future." Li Tianlan's body trembled slightly. He tried to maintain his inner anger and resentment, but the delicate fragrance around him seemed to have magic power. It completely destroyed all his reason, his anger, his confusion, and his determination in the first place. Everything became no resistance in front of Qin Weibai. Li Tianlan suddenly turned around and held Qin Weibai in his arms. Completely ignoring other people's gazes, he held Qin Weibai's small face and kissed her directly. Qin Weibai's body stiffened for a moment, then she obediently reached out and put her arms around his neck, responding carefully. A blush as bright as the morning glow quietly climbed up her face. Li Tianlan's unconscious movement messed up her long hair that was tied up. The turquoise hairpin slipped out of her hair and fell on the dry land. Wang Tianzong, Lin Fengting, Li Honghe, and Sitongyue, the four people's eyes almost followed the turquoise hairpin from top to bottom. The hairpin rolled on the ground. As Li Tianlan moved forward, Qin Weibai raised a small foot and directly stepped on the hairpin. The corners of the four invincible realm experts' mouths twitched at the same time. Lin Fengting coughed dryly. Qin Weibai, who finally realized that the occasion was not right, gently pushed Li Tianlan, tilted her head, and whispered, "Wait for the night." "It's night now." Li Tianlan's voice was rough. Qin Weibai gently raised her eyebrows and glanced at Li Tianlan. Her cheeks were red, and she said with a faint smile, "Yes, what do you want to do?" The question was so direct that Li Tianlan suddenly held back all his movements. He took a deep look at Qin Weibai, took a deep breath, and did not speak. Qin Weibai lay in Li Tianlan's arms and whispered, "You're not angry anymore, are you?" Li Tianlan snorted coldly and remained silent. "Then am I your wife?" Qin Weibai asked again. "What do you think?" Li Tianlan glared at her. "Are you done making out?" Wang Tianzong's voice sounded at an inappropriate time. Li Tianlan was suddenly shocked, and his heart fluctuated violently. Holding Qin Weibai, he ignored Wang Tianzong for a moment. Qin Weibai turned to look at Wang Tianzong in Li Tianlan's arms. She gently squatted down and picked up the turquoise hairpin on the ground. The hairpin fell to the ground and was stepped on. After picking it up, it was still free of dust and had a soft green luster. Qin Weibai casually tidied her long hair and put the hairpin back on her head. Her movements were elegant and soft, and her aura gradually changed. In a short period of time, she seemed to change from the little woman in Li Tianlan's arms to the number 2 figure of Samsara Palace. "What are you still doing here?" Qin Weibai looked at Wang Tianzong and said in a flat tone. A strong killing intent suddenly flashed through Wang Tianzong's eyes. Qin Weibai asked him what he was still doing here. The other meaning of this sentence was that there was nothing he could do here. Wang Tianzong looked at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai was still held in Li Tianlan's arms. But she was no longer the little woman who was nervous and a little careful just now. Qin Weibai in Li Tianlan's arms was as strong and cold as a queen at this moment. Wang Tianzong looked at the turquoise hairpin in Qin Weibai's hair. The green light of the hairpin swayed. It carried a faint but extremely clear glow. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath. If there were only Lin Fengting and Sitongyue, he still dared to gamble and take action. At most, he would pay a heavy price. But at this time, there was Qin Weibai. Everything was unpredictable. Qin Weibai was here. The power of Samsara had come near Lonely Mountain. Qin Weibai came. What about the master of Samsara Palace? Even if the master of Samsara Palace did not take action, Qin Weibai would at least have a top combat capability that could not be ignored. Even if all this could be ignored, Li Tianlan could also exert the power of this turquoise hairpin. The hairpin on Qin Weibai's head seemed to be just an ornament, but it was a murderous weapon belonging to Samsara Palace. Blue Sky Underworld. Blue Sky Underworld fired in Europe 3 years ago. In 3 years, even with the intelligence of the Wang family of Beihai, it was not sure whether Blue Sky Underworld had the energy to fire again. The murderous weapon was the weapon of the nation. The energy storage time of the 12 murderous weapons was the most important secret. If Blue Sky Underworld could fire again, the power of one blow was enough to break the balance in the field. "How is Gu Xingyun?" Wang Tianzong suddenly glanced at Situ Zhongyue and asked. He felt the battle between Gu Xingyun and Situ Zhongyue and heard the roar of the setting sun over West Lake. The weapon of the nation was aimed at the god of war of his country. After this battle, Situ Zhongyue made her position clear, but Sai City also had to pay the price. "I don't know. It's best if he dies," Situ Zhongyue said in a flat tone. Gu Xingyun had just returned from Star State and was already injured. Now he was hit by setting sun head-on. He was lucky not to die. At least he couldn't help Wang Tianzong tonight. Wang Tianzong smiled and said coldly, "If Gu Xingyun doesn't die, what price will Sai City pay? Have you thought about it?" "What about you?" Sidu Zhongyue asked calmly. "You came to Lin, and tonight but didn't succeed. What price will the Wang family of Beihai pay? Have you thought about it?" Wang Tianzong's eyes narrowed, but he did not say much. His figure gradually faded in the ruined lonely mountain and finally disappeared completely. Sword Emperor's last glance fell on Li Tianlan. His voice echoed in the night sky, plain and clear. "East Emperor Palace goes to Wuxia. The Wang family of Beihai welcomes you very much. It depends on whether you dare to come or not." Qin Weibai in Li Tianlan's arms suddenly tightened and looked at Li Tianlan nervously. Li Tianlan did not respond. He just let go of Qin Weibai and bowed deeply to Lin Fengting. "Thank you, senior." He bowed to Sidu Zhongyue again and said respectfully, "Thank you, Governor." Qin Weibai stood beside Li Tianlan and bowed to the two with him. Lin Fengting calmly accepted their bows. Chapter 329. In the latter half of the night, Qin Weibai took everyone to a villa area near West Lake. The villa was bought by Qin Weibai a few years ago. As the adopted daughter of Great Master Wei, Qin Weibai often came to Lin and to visit him when he was alive. This villa was her temporary resting place. The villa was not far from Lonely Mountain. When Lonely Mountain was still there, people with good eyesight could even clearly see the lights in the villa from the highest point. Now that Lonely Mountain had collapsed under the sword of Lin Fengting and Wang Tianzong, this villa had temporarily become a place for the Li family to stay. The villa was large and in a good location. The fragrance of flowers was overflowing, and the landscape could be seen. Flaming Fire, who came to Lin and with Qin Weibai, arranged rooms for the remaining elites of the Li family, while Qin Weibai accompanied Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan paid attention to Li Honghe's condition. Li Honghe changed his clothes but refused to let anyone check his injury. He looked no different from the grandfather in Li Tianlan's memory, but he was very different from the Li Honghe Li Tianlan saw at dusk. There was no difference between him and Li Honghe 3 years ago. There was no difference between him and Li Honghe before the battle tonight. Li Honghe's body was no longer stooped. His body was straight and his hair was gray, but his spirit was extremely strong. He stood quietly in front of the window and looked at West Lake shrouded in moonlight in the night. He seemed to be much younger all of a sudden, giving people a very tall and straight feeling. The more beautiful the surface was, the more fragile the inside was. The worry in Li Tianlan's eyes grew stronger. "I'm fine." Noticing his grandson's gaze, Li Honghe smiled and said slowly, "You know my state. For me now, the injury is not important. As long as I'm alive, I'll be fine." Li Tianlan walked to Li Honghe's side and looked at his still ruddy and even glowing face. "How is it?" Li Tianlan asked seriously. "It's fine." Li Honghe was silent for a moment and gave a simple answer. "What about the specifics?" Li Tianlan pursued him relentlessly. "Tianzong's sword completely shattered the foundation of my martial arts, but at the same time, it also shattered the sword intent that I had accumulated for countless years. My foundation is completely loose, and when my body loses balance, my strength will grow faster and faster. But now I almost have no sword intent, so even if my strength grows very fast, it will not burst my body for the time being. I still have some time to live." Li Honghe laughed at himself and said, "In this case, maybe I will live a little longer than before. It's not a bad thing that I can live." Li Tianlan was silent and didn't seem to know what to say for a moment. "I'm afraid I won't be able to help you much in the future." Li Honghe looked at Li Tianlan and said with a smile, "But I'm relieved that you have Qin Weibai by your side. Even if I die now, I won't have anything to worry about. Tianlan, I've left you a gift both inside and outside Zhongzhou State. This is the last thing I can do for you." "What gift?" Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. "After your maneuver is over, you will slowly get in touch with it," Li Honghe said softly. He took a deep look at Li Tianlan and patted him on the shoulder. I feel guilty to you, so when you get the gift, you don't have to thank me. He looked in the direction of Lonely Mountain. Lonely Mountain had disappeared. The old man shook his head. It's a pity for Lonely Mountain. Lonely Mountain will be rebuilt. Li Tianlan said softly. Li Hong has said yes with a smile and suddenly asked, do you still hate the Wang family of Beihai? Li Tianlan was stunned. I don't. He said softly, in fact, I have never hated the Wang family of Beihai. I don't even hate Kunlun City. This is the truth. I don't think they did anything wrong. To the Wang family of Beihai, to Wang Tianzong, he really didn't feel bad. He admired Wang Tianzong's strength, respected his bearing, feared his strength, and sighed with the foundation of the Wang family of Beihai. Only occasionally, he would think of the Wang family of Beihai's indifference. The Wang family of Beihai did not stand idly by. It was the Li family who took the lead in peeping at the Wang family of Beihai. But it didn't matter. All the affection and all the grievances were settled with the battle of Li Kuangtu's treason. No matter how affectionate and righteous the Wang family of Beihai was, in Li Tianlan's current position, they were opponents and enemies. Li Tianlan didn't want to judge their good or bad, because it didn't make any sense at all. If he were Wang Tianzong, he would have made the same choice. If he were Gu Xingyun, he would have also set off the treason war on the border. But he was Li Tianlan now, so he must consider the problem from the standpoint of the Li family. There was no absolute right or wrong, only different positions. That was all. They are not wrong and neither are we. Li Tianlan said softly, since we are enemies, let's be pure and not talk about grievances. Li Honghe nodded and said quietly, that's good. Both the Li family and the Wang family could not turn back. After tonight, even if there were grievances, they would be written off. When summer solstice smashed the Li family's murderous weapon, Infinite Sky, her martial arts foundation was broken by Li Kuangtu and she fell from the invincible realm. Tonight, Wang Tianzong returned Li Honghe's sword and also broke his foundation, making him fall from the invincible realm. Lin Fengting saved the Li family, but he did not stop Wang Tianzong from ending the last cause and effect between the Wang family and the Li family. After tonight, the debt between them would truly be cleared. Qin Weibai and Sidu Cangyue were together. In the spacious bedroom, the hidden god of Zhongzhou State's clothes were almost all undone, and she was lying on the bed almost naked. However, such a charming scene was not erotic, but a little shocking. Sidu Cangyue was slowly bleeding all over her body. The tiny blood vessels almost completely dyed her white and tight skin, although she was no longer young. At first glance, Sidu Cangyue's body seemed to be entangled with countless red threads. Qin Weibai took a towel to deal with the wounds on Sidu Cangyue's body, and at the same time, applied the powder little by little. Sidu Cangyue's body was covered with small wounds. The wounds were not deep, but there were a lot of them. Now, as the powder was applied, some of the small wounds began to heal gradually. Flaming Fire was arranging rooms and preparing food for the people of the Li family. Only Qin Weibai could clean Sidu Cangyue's wounds. They are all skin wounds. It's not a big problem. Qin Weibai wiped the blood off Sidu Cangyue's body and said casually, how about the internal injury? Fortunately, it's not too serious. Sidu Cangyue said softly. In the divine list, which determined the ranking by strength, Sidu Cangyue's ranking was far inferior to Gu Xingyun's. If Setting Sun hadn't opened fire without warning, she would never have been Gu Xingyun's opponent. But Setting Sun's blow directly wiped out the huge gap between the two sides' combat strength. Gu Xingyun fought her head-on under the power of Setting Sun, but it was not a big deal for Sidu Cangyue. No matter how big the gap between her and Gu Xingyun was, she was not so weak that she could not even take one blow from him. Although she had suffered some internal injuries, they were not even minor injuries to her. Sidu Cangyue raised her palm and quietly observed the ring worn on her finger. Her hand was slender, white, and tender, and crystal clear. The purple ring on her finger had a natural feeling, as if this ring was born to belong to this pair of hands. Sidu Cangyue looked at it quietly, with a complicated look in her eyes. Reluctant to give it up? Qin Weibai asked without raising her head. This is the murderous weapon setting Sunday. If it were you, would you be willing to give it up? Situ Tsangyue asked in reply. It's a murderous weapon that can't be fired. Qin Weibai said calmly, a murderous weapon that can't be used is scrap iron. Even if it's used as a cold weapon to fight, it's normal. Why not? Situ Tsangyue was silent. A murderous weapon that couldn't be fired was indeed scrap iron. But the question was how many people in the dark world could see this problem so open-minded? Situ Tsangyue had Setting Sun in her hand. Even if she was ranked at the bottom of the divine list, when Setting Sun could fire, she would not be afraid of the giants at the top of the divine list. For an invincible realm expert, a murderous weapon meant an absolute huge improvement in combat strength. How is Gu Xingyun's injury? After dealing with Situ Tsangyue's injury, Qin Weibai asked in a low voice. Situ Tsangyue put on her clothes silently and thought carefully. She knew Qin Weibai's plan. So she also knew the importance of this problem. He should not die. Situ Tsangyue said, but I'm not sure if Gu Xingyun can stay in the invincible realm. But even if he can stabilize his realm, it will take a long time to stabilize his injury. This is the best result. It's indeed the best result. Qin Weibai was silent for a while and whispered, in that case, there's no need to be reluctant. Even if Setting Sun is given to Kunlun City, so what? It won't be long before Tianlan gets it back. Situ Tsangyue was still reluctant, but she still nodded. The moment Setting Sun fired and the purple light burst, Situ Tsangyue already knew the result. Tonight's battle was a conflict in the dark world and also a grudge between the superpowers. But in the end, this was Zhongzhou State. The Wang family of Beihai, the Li family, Kunlun City, Sai City. It was not an exaggeration to say that this battle was an internal strife in Zhongzhou State. The dark world and the special warfare system were just a part of Zhongzhou State. In this world, individual strength was important, but it was definitely not everything. Even someone as strong as Wang Tianzong could not sweep the world alone. He also needed to consider political factors, economic factors, stability, balance, and compromise. Situ Tsangyue and Sai City needed to consider these more. Sai City had not entered the secular world before. But as soon as it entered the secular world, it directly used the murderous weapon of Zhongzhou State to aim at the god of war, the protector of Zhongzhou State. This matter could not be concealed. It was believed that before dawn, the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State would express their anger one after another. At this point, even the academics, who had a good relationship with Sai City, would not speak for Sai City. The murderous weapon of the state was aimed at its own people. For such a violation of the rules, Sai City had to give everyone an explanation, and also an explanation that could satisfy Kunlun City. Setting Sun was bound to change owners. This was the most basic thing. No matter how reluctant Situ Tsangyue was, she had to hand over the murderous weapon that had followed her for many years to Kunlun City to appease their anger. A murderous weapon was not even enough. Sai City had occupied the pattern of the dark world in the northeast of Zhongzhou State for many years, and it would also be strongly impacted by Kunlun City. From the moment the murderous weapon opened fire, this was a necessary compromise. It was also part of Qin Weibai's plan. How's the state of Setting Sun? Qin Weibai asked softly. I've stimulated the energy of Setting Sun to the greatest extent. It will take at least 3 to 4 years for Setting Sun to store energy again. Situ Tsangyue said calmly. Qin Weibai nodded. After the battle, Gu Xingyun was seriously injured. Kunlun City had one more murderous weapon and expanded its sphere of influence to the northeast. Kunlun City seemed to have greatly increased in strength, but they needed time to digest it. At least before Gu Xingyun recovered from his injury, a murderous weapon that could not fire could not increase the strength of Kunlun City. On the contrary, it would make them weak. In the case that their comprehensive strength was far inferior to the other party, the only thing Qin Weibai and Sai City could do was to sacrifice their existing resources, secretly and quietly exchange some things to protect their core interests. After this battle, Sai City would lose the murderous weapon and even lose the right to speak in the special warfare system of 1 or 2 provinces in the northeast. After paying these prices, The core interest they needed to protect was undoubtedly Li Tianlan. There were gains and losses. Everything is temporary. Qin Weibai looked at Sidu Zhangyue and said. Sidu Zhangyue nodded and suddenly asked, "What did the Wang family of Beihai say?" Li Honghe was the former god of war of Zhongzhou state. Although Li Guangtu's treason had dimmed the glory of the Li family, Li Honghe was still one of the veterans of Zhongzhou state and had a highly respected status. Situ Zhangyue should not have aimed the murderous weapon at Gu Xingyun. But Wang Tianzong should not have taken the initiative to attack the former god of war of Zhongzhou state. If Li Honghe died tonight, everything would be out of the question. But now Li Honghe was alive. It was believed that many people in Zhongzhou state had something to say. The Southeast group must also pay the price for what Wang Tianzong did tonight. The Li family was bound to get compensation. That was the rule. Everyone was abiding by the rule. I don't know. I'll listen to Tianlan. He can get whatever he wants. Qin Weibai smiled and said, "Now, our distinguished guests should be on their way." "You did all this for him?" Sidu Zhangyue looked at Qin Weibai with complicated eyes. "Is it worth it?" She paused and continued to ask, "Have you ever regretted it?" Qin Weibai's body stiffened for a moment. "No, it's worth it," she whispered, but her tone was full of firmness. After tonight, the plan that had been planned for many years would begin, and everything would be irreversible. Li Tianlan's East Emperor Palace would gradually be perfected and eventually form a real prototype after the maneuver. It was not until this moment that Qin Weibai was sure that she had really done everything she could do. All of it. She created a paradise for the man she loved most. At the same time, she created a hell for herself. Qin Weibai suddenly smiled and asked softly, "Have you ever regretted falling in love with Li Guangtu?" Sidu Zhangyue froze for a moment and looked at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai's eyes were quiet and deep. Sidu Zhangyue shook her head and said, "No." This was respect for his feelings and also respect for himself. Even if Li Guangtu really committed treason. Even if Li Guangtu was really heinous. But for anyone, no matter what the nature of the person he fell in love with, no matter what happened later, as long as he loved, there was no need to regret. Just because he loved. When Qin Weibai went downstairs and returned to the living room, Li Honghe had already gone upstairs to rest. Li Tianlan was still sitting in the hall. Lin Fengting, who had left soon after arriving at the villa, reappeared in the hall. Beside him sat a handsome young man with almost the same temperament as him. The three were chatting casually. Qin Weibai went downstairs quietly and came to Li Tianlan's side. Lin Fengting glanced at her and said with a smile, "Boss Qin, let me introduce you. This is my son Lin Yuxian. You are all young people. You should support each other in the future. Yuxian, this is Qin Weibai, Boss Qin. Call her sister." Lin Yuxian came to Lin, and with Lin Fengting. Lin Fengting arrived at Lonely Mountain first. Lin Yuxian did not catch up with the last earth-shattering sword, but was brought here by Lin Fengting. Lin Yuxian stood up with a smile and looked at Qin Weibai. He lost his composure for a moment and then calmed down again. However, he did not dare to take the initiative to reach out. He just scratched his head and said with a smile, "Sister Qin, I am Lin Yuxian." "What, Sister Qin? Call me sister." Lin Fengting frowned. Lin Yuxian looked at his father strangely and then said with a wry smile, "Sister." Qin Weibai nodded with a smile. She took Li Tianlan's arm and sat beside him. She chuckled and said, "This is my husband. You should all know him." A playful smile flashed across Lin Fengting's mouth. Lin Yuxian immediately understood what Qin Weibai's unnecessary introduction meant. He looked at Li Tianlan and felt a little embarrassed. He called Qin Weibai sister. What was his sister's husband? This boy. When they met for the first time, he called him Brother Lin. Li Tianlan was also a little embarrassed. He quietly glared at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai smiled and was as beautiful as a flower. Li Tianlan just wanted to speak, but Lin Yuxian had already taken the initiative to speak. He reached out his hand as formally as they had just met for the first time. "Brother-in-law, hello." "Brother Lin, you are too polite." Li Tianlan held Lin Yuxian's hand and said with a wry smile, "We'd better call each other separately. You are older than me, Brother-in-law is brother-in-law, not according to your age. Lin Fengting interrupted Li Tianlan's words. Don't take advantage of me. That's it. Qin Weibai looked at Lin Fengting meaningfully and said with a chuckle, I didn't prepare a greeting gift in advance. Yo Xian's call of sister and brother-in-law is a little unfair. We are family. Don't care about this. Lin Fengting said softly. Qin Weibai took a deep look at him. She seemed to think of something and nodded. Little Bai, why don't you let Tianlan go to Wuyue to develop? Lin Fengting casually changed the way he addressed Qin Weibai and asked naturally. Li Tianlan turned his head subconsciously and glanced at Qin Weibai. Wuyue? Qin Weibai's expression was calm. She whispered, the water is too deep. As far as I know, Wuyue is more suitable for Tianlan's development now. Although it is the territory of the Wang family of Beihai, the Wang family of Beihai is now very complicated. If he is careful, Tianlan may be able to create his own foundation in Wuyue. Lin Fengting said quietly, the current leader of Wuyue is Wang Qinglei. He is a character. Even if there is a foundation, it is fake, at least not stable. Qin Weibai shook her head and looked at Li Tianlan. The foundation of East Emperor Palace should be in the south. She said softly. The south? Li Tianlan repeated the words. Qin Weibai nodded. The southernmost. She held Li Tianlan's hand and said softly, there will be a chance soon. It is the most suitable for you to go to the south. In the southernmost south, she had prepared everything for Li Tianlan. As long as there was a chance, it would become Li Tianlan's path to heaven. Qin Weibai was even ready for the opportunity. The southernmost part of Zhongzhou State. It was not Nanyun Province. It was Tianan in the south of Nanyun. It was nearly 40,000 square kilometers, nominally belonging to Annan State, but now actually under the control of Zhongzhou State. For Li Tianlan. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.